Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jeremiah Ironwood, and I've been a park ranger for 6 years now. I work the high country up on Mount Rogers in Virginia's Jefferson National Forest. At 5,729 feet, it's the tallest peak in the state, and in winter it becomes one of the loneliest places on Earth. People think being a ranger is all about giving directions to lost tourists and putting out campfires. But up here in the alpine zone, above the tree line where nothing grows but grass and rocks, my real job is saving lives. I'm trained in high-altitude rescue and wilderness medicine. When hikers get caught in sudden weather or fall off cliffs, I'm the guy who rappels down to get them. The weather station sits 8 miles from the nearest road. In good weather, that's a tough hike. In winter, when the snow piles up 10 feet deep and the wind hits 70 miles per hour, you might as well be on the moon. January 1988 brought the worst blizzard I'd ever seen. The storm hit on a Tuesday and kept going for 3 days straight. By Friday, I was completely cut off. Radio worked sometimes, but mostly it was just static and weird echoes. The snowdrifts were so deep that even the rescue helicopter couldn't land anywhere within miles. I didn't mind being alone. After 6 years up here, I was used to it. I had enough food for 2 weeks, a generator for power, and plenty of books. The station was built to handle anything Mother Nature could throw at it. Thick walls, reinforced roof, emergency heating system. I'd weathered plenty of storms in this little building. But something felt different about this one. First thing I noticed was the animals. Usually during big storms, deer and elk head downhill to find shelter in the thick forests. Makes sense, right? Why stay up where the wind can knock you over when you can hide in the trees? But tracks in the snow told a different story. Every set of prints I could see through my binoculars was heading uphill, toward the summit. Animals don't do that. Animals are smart about weather. They know how to survive. The radio started acting weird too. Instead of the usual check-ins from other ranger stations, I kept getting voices that sounded backwards, like someone had recorded normal speech and played it in reverse. I figured it was some kind of atmospheric interference from the storm. Weird things happen to radio waves in extreme weather. Then, Saturday morning, I got a call that changed everything. "Base, this is Ranger Station Charlie," came the voice through heavy static. "We've got a report of missing hikers on Mount Rogers. 2 college kids, last seen Thursday before the storm hit." My blood went cold. Nobody should have been up here when this weather moved in. The forecast had been clear for days. Major blizzard incoming, stay away from the high country. "What's their last known position?" I radioed back. Witnesses at the trailhead saw them heading toward the weather station. Said they were planning to shelter there until the storm passed. I looked around my small building. No sign anyone had tried to reach it. No tracks, no knocked on door, no calls for help. But if they were out there somewhere... "I'll start a search when this wind dies down," I told Charlie. "But if they're up here, they've been without shelter for 3 days. "There's something else," Charlie's voice crackled through the static. The witness said the hikers seemed scared, kept looking over their shoulders, said they saw a hollow man following them up the trail. I almost laughed. City kids probably saw a tree moving in the wind and thought it was Bigfoot. Happens all the time. But they were still missing, and that was my job to fix. "Roger that. I'll investigate when conditions improve." The wind died down that evening, enough for me to step outside and look around. The world was pure white in every direction. Snow had drifted against my building up to the windows. My truck was completely buried somewhere under a small mountain of powder. But I could see tracks again, and they still didn't make sense. Most of them were animal tracks, all heading uphill like I'd noticed before. But there were human footprints too. 2 sets, like the missing hikers. They came from the direction of the main trail and headed toward my station, but they didn't reach it. About 50 yards from my building, the tracks just stopped. Not like the hikers had turned around or fallen down or gotten covered by snow. They just ended, in the middle of nothing. Where the footprints stopped, there were two perfect holes in the snow. Not holes where someone had dug or fallen through. Holes shaped exactly like human bodies, as if two people had been pressed down into the snow and then removed. I stood there in the bitter cold, staring at those holes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The holes went deep, maybe 4 feet down to the frozen ground. They were exactly the right size and shape for two people lying down. But there was no disturbed snow around them, no signs of struggle, nothing to explain how they'd gotten there. The temperature was dropping fast, and the wind was picking up again. I needed to get inside. But as I turned to go back to the station, I heard something that made my skin crawl. Laughter. High-pitched, echoing laughter coming from somewhere up the mountain. From the direction where all those animal tracks were leading. No human being could be up there. Not in this cold. Not in this wind. Not and survive. But something was laughing at me from the darkness above. I barely slept that night. Every time I dozed off, I'd hear that laughter again, drifting down from the peak. When I'd wake up and listen carefully, there was nothing but wind. By morning, the storm had calmed enough for me to radio for help. I needed a helicopter to search for those missing hikers, and I needed it before they froze to death. With negative on helicopter support came the response from headquarters. Weather's still too unstable. We can get a ground team to you by Tuesday earliest. Tuesday was 4 days away. If those college kids were alive somewhere on this mountain, they wouldn't last 4 more hours, let alone 4 days. I grabbed my emergency pack. Medical supplies, emergency shelter, food, rope, everything I'd need for a rescue. The temperature was 15 below zero, but the wind had dropped to almost nothing. Perfect conditions for a quick search. I followed the tracks up from where they'd stopped near my station. Above that point, there were no more human prints, but plenty of animal tracks still heading uphill. Deer, elk, even what looked like bear tracks, all going the wrong direction. About a mile up the slope, I found something that made my hands shake inside my gloves. A campsite. 2 sleeping bags, a small tent, backpacks with college IDs that matched the missing hikers' names. Jake Morrison and Lisa Chen, both 19, both students at Virginia Tech. But here's what made no sense. The campsite looked like it had been there for weeks. Snow had built up around everything in neat, undisturbed drifts. The tent fabric was stiff with ice. The sleeping bags were frozen solid. This was impossible. The hikers had only been missing for 3 days. This camp looked like it had been abandoned in the middle of winter and left for a month. I unzipped one of the sleeping bags, hoping I wouldn't find a frozen body inside. It was empty. But not just empty, hollow. Like the inside of the bag had been scooped out, leaving a perfect human-shaped void. Same with the second bag. Both had holes in them shaped exactly like people. But no people to be found. The medical training in me said hypothermia. Severe hypothermia can make people do crazy things, strip off their clothes and wander into the snow. But hypothermia doesn't make sleeping bags hollow out like this. I searched the area for another hour, calling their names, looking for any sign of where they might have gone. The Jolshid. Only thing I found were more of those animal tracks, leading higher up the mountain toward the bare summit. That's when my radio crackled to life. Jeremiah. The voice was faint, full of static. Jeremiah, can you hear me? This is Ironwood. Who is this? It's Dave. Dave Kowalski from Station 7. I'm coming up to help with the search. Dave Kowalski was a good friend and a solid ranger. He worked the valley stations about 20 miles south, but there was no way he could have made it up here. The roads were impassable. Dave, how did you get through? The access road is completely snowed in. I hiked up. Took all night, but I made it. I'm about a mile below you, following your tracks. Something in his voice didn't sound right. Too flat, too emotionless for someone who'd just hiked 20 miles through a blizzard. Dave, stay where you are. I'm coming down to meet you. No need, I can see you from here. I'm coming up. I looked downhill but couldn't see anyone. The snow was deep and the terrain was rough, with lots of rocks and small cliffs that could hide a person. But if Dave was really down there, I should be able to spot him moving. "Dave, I don't see you. Can you describe your location?" No answer. Just static. I tried calling him again, but got no response. The radio had gone completely dead. Not even static now. Just silence. That's when I heard footsteps crunching through snow behind me. I turned around, expecting to see Dave coming up the trail I'd made. Instead, there was a figure about 100 yards away, walking steadily toward me through snow that should have been waist deep. But the figure wasn't breaking through the snow. It was walking on top of it, like the powder was solid ground. "Dave?" I called out. The figure didn't answer, just kept walking toward me with that same steady pace. As it got closer, I could see it was wearing ranger clothes. The same winter uniform I had on. Same hat, same jacket, same boots. But something was wrong with the way it moved, too stiff, like a puppet being jerked along by strings. "Dave, is that you?" 50 yards away now, close enough to see a face under the hat brim. It wasn't Dave. It wasn't anybody. The face was just hollow, like someone had taken a normal human head and scooped out everything inside, leaving just skin stretched over an empty skull. The eye sockets were black holes. The mouth was open, but there was nothing behind it, just darkness going down into nothing. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. This had to be hypothermia hallucinations, altitude sickness, something rational. But the thing kept walking toward me. Its hollow face turned in my direction like it could see me with those empty sockets. I ran. I've never been so scared in my life. I crashed through the deep snow, falling and scrambling and fighting my way back toward the weather station. Behind me, I could hear steady footsteps following. Not hurrying, not running, just walking with that same mechanical pace. When I finally reached my building and slammed the door behind me, I stood there gasping and shaking. Through the window, I could see the figure standing about 50 yards away, motionless in the snow. It stayed there for 3 hours, just watching the building, never moving, never changing position. When the sun finally set, it was gone. But I could hear that laughter again, coming from high up on the mountain. And now I could hear voices mixed in with it. 2 voices, young and scared, calling for help. Jake and Lisa, the missing hikers. They were up there somewhere, and something was keeping them. Something that could make perfect copies of people. Something that could walk on top of snow. Something with a hollow face and empty eyes. Something that was playing with me. I didn't sleep at all that second night. Every time I looked out the window, I expected to see that hollow-faced thing standing in the snow, watching me. But the area around the station stayed empty. What I did see were more animals. Lots more. Through my binoculars, I could make out dark shapes moving up the mountainside in single file, like they were being led somewhere. Deer, elk, even a black bear. All walking calmly uphill through snow that should have sent them running for shelter. And I kept hearing those voices. Jake and Lisa, calling for help. But their voices seemed to come from different directions each time, like they were being moved around the mountain. Sunday morning, my radio crackled to life again. "Jeremiah, this is Base. We've got another missing hiker report." My stomach dropped. "Who this time?" "Dave Kowalski from Station 7. He radioed yesterday that he was heading up to help you search. Haven't heard from him since." I stared at the radio. Dave, the real Dave, was missing, which meant whatever I'd seen walking toward me in the snow had been wearing his face like a mask. "Sir, I need to tell you something. I've been seeing things up here. Impossible things." "What kind of things, Ranger Ironwood?" How could I explain? That something was making copies of people, that animals were marching uphill to their deaths, that hollow-faced things were stalking me through the snow. I think there's something dangerous on this mountain, something that's taking people. Long pause. "Ironwood, you've been isolated for 5 days in extreme conditions. It's possible you're experiencing altitude-related hallucinations." "This isn't hallucinations. 3 people are missing, and I found evidence that something unnatural is—" "Ranger Ironwood." The voice was stern now. You will maintain radio contact every 4 hours and wait for the ground team. Do not attempt any more solo rescues. That's an order. The radio went dead. They thought I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. But those voices calling for help were real, and I was the only one who could do anything about it. I loaded my pack with everything I might need: emergency medical supplies, climbing rope, flares, extra food, and water. If I was going to find those missing people, I had to go up to the summit where all those animal tracks were leading. The hike up Mount Rogers' final slope is brutal even in good weather. Above 5,000 feet there are no trees, just exposed rock and alpine grass. In winter, it's like walking on the surface of an alien planet, nothing but white snow and gray sky in every direction. But as I climbed higher, I started seeing things that shouldn't exist. Perfect circles melted into the snow, each one about 6 feet across. Inside each circle, the ground was bare and brown, like someone had held a giant blowtorch on it. But there was no smell of burning, no ash, nothing to explain how the snow had melted in such neat patterns. And in the center of each circle, there were bones. Not human bones, animal bones. Deer skulls, elk rib cages, bear femurs, all picked completely clean and arranged in careful piles. Hundreds of animals worth of bones, sorted by type like someone was organizing a collection. The voices were getting stronger now. Jake and Lisa crying for help, begging someone to let them go. Their voices seemed to come from just ahead of me, always just out of sight around the next rock or over the next ridge. "Jake! Lisa! Where are you?" I shouted. "Help us!" Lisa's voice came from my left. "It won't let us leave." I turned toward the sound and saw footprints in the snow, fresh ones made by hiking boots. I followed them around a cluster of boulders and found myself staring at something that made my knees go weak. Dave Kowalski was standing in a small clearing, his back to me. He wasn't moving, wasn't responding to my calls, just standing there like a statue. "Dave! Thank God you're okay. I've been looking everywhere for you." I walked toward him, relief flooding through me. Finally, another human being, someone who could help me make sense of what was happening up here. But as I got closer, something about Dave seemed wrong. His posture was too straight, too rigid, and he was standing in snow up to his waist, but somehow not sinking down into it. "Dave, you okay, buddy?" I reached out and touched his shoulder. Dave turned around. His face was just like the other one I'd seen, completely hollow. Empty eye sockets, empty mouth, just skin stretched over nothing. But this time I could see more. I could see that his entire body was like this. His ranger jacket hung on a frame of bones with nothing in between. His hands were just gloves with skeleton fingers inside. And when that empty mouth opened, Jake Morrison's voice came out. "Help me, please. It took everything out of me and now I can't move." I staggered backward, my mind reeling. This thing was wearing Dave's body like a suit of clothes, and somehow it had Jake's voice trapped inside it. "Where's Lisa?" I managed to ask. Dave's hollow face turned toward a stand of rocks about 50 yards away. "She's over there. It's keeping us in different places so we can't help each other." I looked where he was indicating and saw another figure standing motionless in the snow. This one was wearing a young woman's winter hiking gear, but even from a distance I could see it had that same hollow, empty look. "What did this to you?" I asked. "It was so hungry," Jake's voice said from Dave's empty mouth. "It's been hungry for so long. It ate everything inside us and left just the shells. But we're still aware, still trapped in here." That's when I heard something behind me, slow footsteps crunching through snow. I turned and saw the most terrifying thing I'd ever laid eyes on. It was humanoid, but barely. 7 feet tall and so thin it looked like a skeleton with skin stretched over it. Its arms and legs were too long, its fingers ended in black claws, and its face was a nightmare. Sunken cheeks, hollow eye sockets so deep they disappeared into shadow, and a mouth that stretched too wide, revealing rows of broken, yellowed teeth. But the worst part was that I could see right through it, not invisible but hollow, like it was made of empty space shaped like a person, and it radiated cold. Not just the winter air cold, but something deeper, a cold that came from inside, like it was sucking all the warmth out of the world around it. You found my collection, it said, and its voice was like wind through empty caves. Do you like what I've done with your friends? The thing gestured to Dave and Lisa's hollow bodies. They were so easy to empty. Humans always are when they're desperate enough, hungry enough. The cold makes you so very hungry, doesn't it? I realized I was starving. I'd eaten that morning, but suddenly I felt like I hadn't had food in days. My stomach was cramping with hunger, and all I could think about was eating. That's how it starts, the creature said, taking a step closer. The hunger. Soon you'll be so empty inside that I won't even need to hollow you out. You'll do it yourself. I fumbled for one of the emergency flares in my pack. I didn't know why, but some instinct told me fire might help. The flare ignited with a bright red flame, and the creature shrieked and stepped backward. Heat, it hissed. I remember heat. From before the cold, before the hunger. What are you? I asked, keeping the flare between us. I was Cherokee once, a hunter. Winter came early that year, 1847. Snowed for months. My tribe starved, my family starved, and when there was nothing left to eat, the creature's hollow face twisted into something like grief. I ate them, my wife, my children, anyone I could find, and when spring came and the hunger was finally gone, the mountain cursed me, made me hungry forever, made me hollow forever, made me into this. It gestured to its terrible form. Now I collect the hollow ones. The ones who know what real hunger feels like. The ones who understand emptiness. The flare was burning lower. I had maybe 2 minutes of flame left. And then I'd be defenseless against this thing. Let them go, I said, nodding toward Dave and Lisa's bodies. Take me instead. Oh, I'll take you too, the Wendigo said. But I'm keeping my collection. They're so beautifully empty now. Perfect vessels for my hunger. That's when I understood. This thing wasn't just killing people. It was hollowing them out and keeping them alive, trapping their consciousness in empty shells so they could experience its eternal hunger forever. And I was about to join them. The flare was almost burned out. In the red flickering light, I could see the Wendigo getting ready to rush me. Its hollow face was twisted with hunger, and those black claws were reaching out toward my chest. But I had an idea. A desperate, probably stupid idea, but it was all I had. I pulled out my second flare and lit it off the dying first one. Now I had maybe 3 minutes of fire between me and this thing, but instead of backing away, I started walking toward it. You want to know about hunger? I shouted. You want to know about being empty inside? The Wendigo stopped, confused by my approach. I've been empty for 6 years, I continued, getting closer. Ever since my partner died in a climbing accident. Ever since I failed to save him. I've been hollow inside every single day. This was true. My climbing partner, Marcus, had fallen during a rescue attempt 3 years ago. I'd been the one holding the rope when his anchor failed. I'd been the one who couldn't pull him up. I'd been living with that emptiness ever since. You think you're the only one who knows what it's like to have nothing inside? I was almost close enough to touch the creature now. You think you're the only one who's hungry all the time? The Wendigo was backing away from the flare, but it was also listening. Maybe for the first time in 140 years, someone was talking to it about emptiness instead of running away screaming. But you know what the difference is between you and me? I asked. I learned to live with it. I learned to help other people so I wouldn't have to think about the hole inside me. I was close enough now to see details of its face. The way the skin was stretched too tight over its skull. The way shadows moved in its empty eye sockets like something alive was trapped in there. You let the hunger eat everything you were, I said. Every memory, every good thing, every reason to keep living. You fed it all to the emptiness until there was nothing left but wanting. The Wendigo was pressed back against a boulder now, as far from the flare as it could get. But it wasn't trying to attack anymore. It was just listening. I can't give you back what you lost, I said, but I can give you something else. I held the flare out toward it. I can give you heat. Real heat. Not just the cold fire of hunger, enough to warm whatever's left of you. It will hurt, the creature whispered. Yeah, I said. It probably will. But maybe being hurt is better than being empty. For a moment, we just stood there in the snow, a man with a flare and a monster with 140 years of hunger between us. The wind had died completely, and the only sound was the sputtering of the flame. Then the Wendigo reached out one skeletal hand and touched the flare. The effect was immediate and terrible. The creature began to burn, but not with normal fire. It burned with light, pure white light that seemed to come from inside its bones. It screamed, but the scream changed as the light grew brighter, changed from hunger and rage to something else. Relief. The light spread through its entire body, and I could see its true form inside the hollow shell. A Cherokee hunter, young and strong, finally free from the curse that had consumed him for more than a century. "Thank you," he whispered, and then the light flared so bright I had to close my eyes. When I could see again, there was nothing left but a small pile of ash in the snow. And standing nearby, looking confused but alive, were Dave Kowalski and two college students I'd never met but recognized from their IDs. "What happened?" Dave asked. "Last thing I remember was heading up to help you search, and then nothing." I looked at Jake and Lisa. They seemed okay, cold and confused, but not hollow anymore. Their eyes had life in them again, and their voices were their own. "Long story," I said. "Let's get off this mountain." But as we started down toward the weather station, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. In the pile of ash where the Wendigo had burned away, something was moving. A small flame, no bigger than a candle, flickering in the wind, and around it, the snow was starting to melt in a perfect circle. The hunger wasn't gone. It was just smaller, waiting to grow again. I kicked snow over the flame until it went out, but I had a feeling that wouldn't be enough. Some kinds of emptiness never really go away. They just wait for the next person desperate enough to feed them. We made it back to the station just as the rescue helicopter arrived. Dave and the students were flown out for medical evaluation, and I gave my report to the investigators. I told them the truth about finding the missing hikers, but left out most of the supernatural details. Who would believe me? As I was packing up to leave the mountain, I found something that made me think the Wendigo had been telling the truth about one thing. In the historical records for the area, I found a newspaper clipping from 1848. Cherokee hunter missing after harsh winter. Tribe reports cannibalism among desperate survivors. The article was brief, but it mentioned a hunter named Joseph Crow Feather, who disappeared during the worst winter on record. His family and several others had been found dead, apparently eaten by someone desperate to survive. Joseph Crow Feather. The Wendigo had never told me his original name, but somehow I knew that was who he'd been before the hunger took everything else away. I kept that newspaper clipping, still have it in fact, because sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in whatever ranger station I'm working, I remember that small flame in the ash. I remember how hungry I felt up on that mountain, how empty I'd been since Marcus died. And I wonder if the heat I gave that creature was enough, or if somewhere up on Mount Rogers the hunger is growing again. That was 15 years ago. I'm not a ranger anymore. Couldn't stay in the mountains after what happened up there. Now I work as a paramedic in Richmond, saving lives in the city instead of the wilderness. But I still think about Mount Rogers every day. The official report listed the incident as a severe weather rescue with psychological complications due to isolation. Dave, Jake, and Lisa all recovered completely, though none of them remember much about their time on the mountain. The doctors called it trauma-induced amnesia. I call it a blessing, but I remember everything. The medical evaluation after my rescue showed some interesting results. My core body temperature was 2 degrees lower than normal, and it stayed that way ever since. I'm cold all the time now. Not just chilly, but cold down in my bones like the mountain winter never really left me. And I'm hungry. Not starving, but constantly aware of the need for food in a way I never was before. I eat regularly, more than I used to, but it never feels like enough. Sometimes I wake up at 3 in the morning with my stomach cramping from hunger, even though I ate a full dinner just hours before. The doctors say it's psychosomatic. Trauma can change how your body works, they tell me. Create phantom symptoms that feel completely real. Maybe they're right, but I don't think the hunger is phantom. I keep track of missing person reports from the Jefferson National Forest. Not officially. I'm not a ranger anymore, so it's not my job. But I watch the news, search online databases, maintain contact with my old colleagues who still work the mountain stations. Over the past 15 years, there have been 43 unexplained disappearances in the Mount Rogers area. Most are listed as lost hikers or presumed dead due to exposure. The search teams find abandoned camps, scattered equipment, sometimes footprints that lead nowhere, but they never find bodies. And there are other reports, unofficial ones. Rangers who've seen hollow-faced figures walking through the snow. Hikers who've heard voices calling for help from empty mountainsides. Search and rescue teams who find people-shaped holes melted into snowdrifts. The Park Service doesn't like to talk about these reports. Bad for tourism. But the rangers share stories in private, the way people always do when they've seen something that shouldn't exist. 3 years ago, a young ranger named Sarah Kim disappeared during a winter search and rescue on Mount Rogers. The official report said she fell through ice on a mountain stream and her body was swept away. But her partner told a different story over beers one night in a bar in Abingdon. He said Sarah had been walking ahead of him on the trail when she suddenly stopped and started talking to someone, but there was nobody there. She had a full conversation with empty air, nodding and responding like someone was talking back. Then she walked off the trail, straight up the mountain toward the summit, and disappeared into the snow. When they found her gear the next day, her radio was still transmitting. But instead of her voice, it was broadcasting the sound of wind through empty spaces, like the sound was coming from inside something hollow. I drove up to Mount Rogers after that, parked as close as I could get to the old weather station and hiked up through the snow. I told myself I was just checking, making sure the creature I'd burned away was really gone. But I think I was really hoping to find Sarah, to help her the way I couldn't help Marcus all those years ago. I found the spot where I'd confronted the Wendigo. There was still a bare circle in the ground where nothing would grow, even 15 years later. And in the center of that circle, I found a small pile of bones. Not animal bones this time, human bones. A ranger's badge, a radio, all arranged in a neat little collection. The Wendigo was back. Maybe it had never really been gone. Maybe what I'd burned away was just one hollow shell, and the hunger itself had found a new form. Or maybe the heat I'd given it hadn't been enough, and it had slowly rebuilt itself from ash and appetite over the years. I didn't try to confront it this time. I was older, slower, and I no longer had the righteous anger that had protected me before. Besides, I understood now that some problems can't be solved by one person with a flare gun. Some kinds of emptiness are bigger than individual courage. I left the mountain that day, but I didn't stop watching. The disappearances continued. More rangers told stories they weren't supposed to tell. More families lost people to something that couldn't be explained in official reports. And I started to wonder if the Wendigo was the only hungry thing up there. Last month, I got a call from Dave Kowalski. He's retired now too, living in Florida, as far from mountains as he can get. We don't talk often, but when we do, it's usually about Mount Rogers, about the things we can't forget. "Jerry," he said, "I've been having dreams about that winter on the mountain, but they're not dreams about what happened to us." "What do you mean?" "They're dreams about what's happening now, people getting hollowed out one by one. And the thing doing it, it's not just one creature anymore." I felt that familiar cold spread through my chest. "How many?" "I don't know. Too many to count. Like the hunger is spreading, creating more of them every time someone goes missing." Dave paused, and I could hear him breathing hard over the phone. "Jerry, I think what you did up there, giving that thing heat, showing it compassion, I think it did something, changed something, but maybe not in the way you hoped." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe you didn't kill the hunger. Maybe you taught it how to feel human again, and now it's trying to collect as many hollow people as it can, trying to remember what it lost." I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about flames and emptiness and the different ways people can be consumed. If Dave is right, then Mount Rogers has become something like a magnet for lost souls, a place where the empty and desperate are drawn to become part of something larger and hungrier than themselves. And if that's true, then every person who goes missing up there isn't really gone. They're just becoming part of a growing collection of hollow shells, all of them trying to fill the same unfillable void. I still have that emergency flare I carried down from the mountain 15 years ago. I keep it in my desk drawer at work, next to the newspaper clipping about Joseph Crow Feather. Sometimes I take it out and hold it, remembering the weight of fire in my hand and the look of relief on a monster's face as it finally burned away. But I know now that some fires don't stay lit. Some hungers come back stronger than before, and some mountains never let go of the people they've claimed. If you're ever in Virginia and you see signs for Mount Rogers State Park, keep driving. Find a different mountain to climb, a different view to admire. Because some places are beautiful and terrible at the same time, and the terrible part has a way of following you home. The hunger is still up there, waiting in the snow, getting stronger every winter. And sometimes, late at night, when the cold settles deep in my bones, I wonder if it's waiting for me to come back. Maybe it always has been. My name is Benjamin Ashford, but folks just call me Ben. I've been a ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 16 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these ancient hills could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, illegal hunters, you name it. My daddy was a ranger before me, and his daddy before him. 3 generations of Ashfords keeping watch over these mountains. We always said it was our duty to protect what couldn't protect itself. But I never believed the old stories, not until October of 1983 when I learned some things are better left alone. It started on a Tuesday morning, October 4th. I was getting ready for a 3-day patrol up to Whispering Ridge, that high country nobody visits much anymore. 8,000 feet up, accessible only by a 12-mile trail that'll test your legs and your lungs. Most tourists stick to the easy paths down in the valleys. Smart tourists, as it turned out. The Weather Service was calling for early frost with fog rolling in thick from the valleys. Temperature was supposed to drop to 35 degrees at night. Perfect hiking weather if you knew what you were doing, which I did. I'd walked that trail more times than I could count. My wife Sarah used to worry about me going up there alone. "Those mountains don't like being watched," she'd say, half joking. But Sarah died in a car accident 4 years back, and now the mountains were all I had left. They were quieter than people, more honest too. A mountain wouldn't lie to you or leave you when you needed it most. I loaded my pack with the usual supplies: first aid kit, emergency radio, though it wouldn't work above 6,000 feet, sleeping bag rated for 20 degrees, enough food for 4 days, and my service pistol. Standard gear for a backcountry patrol. My job was to check the trail markers, document any wildlife signs, and make sure no one was camping legally in the protected areas. The Cherokee folks who lived here first had stories about Whispering Ridge. They called the creatures up there Kekle Kudle, the hairy giants. Later, when the Scots-Irish settlers came in the 1800s, they had their own name, Wild Men of the Woods. Every mountain family had a story about something big and dark moving through the trees, watching from just out of sight. I figured it was all nonsense, mountain folklore designed to keep outsiders away from the best hunting grounds. Every old-timer I'd met had a story about seeing something that shouldn't exist, hearing calls that didn't belong to any known animal. But in 16 years of walking these trails, I'd never seen anything more mysterious than a black bear standing on its hind legs. The morning I headed up to Whispering Ridge, the air felt different, heavier somehow, like the mountains themselves were holding their breath. The usual bird sounds seemed muted, and even the squirrels were quiet. I chalked it up to the weather front moving in. I started the hike at sunrise, my boots crunching through the first fallen leaves of autumn. The trail began easy enough, winding through mixed hardwood forest where the maples were just starting to turn red and gold. But as I climbed higher, the trees changed. The hardwoods gave way to ancient hemlocks and towering pines that had been growing since before my great-grandfather was born. By noon, I was 6 miles in and 3,000 feet higher than I'd started. The air was thin enough to make me work for each breath, and the fog was starting to creep up from the valleys below. That's when I found the first sign that something wasn't right. There, in a patch of soft mud beside a natural spring, was a footprint. Not a bear print, not a human print. Something in between, but bigger than either. 15 inches long and 6 inches wide with what low, had like 5 toes. The print was fresh, made that morning, maybe an hour before I got there. I knelt down and studied it carefully. In 16 years of tracking everything from deer to wildcats, I'd never seen anything like it. The depth of the print suggested something that weighed at least 400 pounds, maybe more. But the stride length, when I found the next print 20 feet away, suggested something that walked upright. I took out my camera and photographed the prints from several angles. Then I made detailed measurements in my field notebook, just like my training taught me. Whatever made these tracks, it was heading deeper into the wilderness, toward the high country where no trails went. The smart thing would have been to turn back, radio for backup, get some other rangers up there to investigate. But my radio was already crackling with static, and I knew that in another 1,000 feet of elevation, it would be useless. Besides, I had a job to do. The trail markers needed checking, and there were reports of illegal camping in the protected areas around Whispering Ridge. As I continued climbing, the forest grew darker and quieter. The ancient trees blocked out most of the sky, and the fog was thick enough now that I could barely see 50 yards ahead. But I kept finding those prints, always heading in the same direction I was going, always staying just parallel to the trail, like something was keeping pace with me. Something was watching me walk up that mountain. I could feel it in the way the forest held its breath, in the way my skin crawled between my shoulder blades. But I was Ben Ashford, third-generation mountain man, and I'd be damned if I'd let some unexplained track scare me off my own mountain. I should have turned back while I still could. By late afternoon, I was 8 miles up the trail and closing in on Whispering Ridge proper. The fog had gotten so thick I was navigating more by compass and memory than by sight. The temperature had dropped 15 degrees since morning, and my breath was starting to show white in the air. That's when I smelled it. A stench like wet fur mixed with something dead, something that had been rotting in the ground for weeks. It was strong enough to make my eyes water, and it seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I stopped and pulled out my service pistol, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. The smell faded after a few minutes, but the silence that followed was worse. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees, just the sound of my own heartbeat and my boots on the rocky trail. Then I heard it, a sound I'd never heard before and hope I never hear again. It started low, like the rumble of distant thunder, but it was coming from something with a throat, something alive. The sound built and rose until it became a howl that seemed to shake the trees themselves. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like forever. When the sound finally died away, the forest stayed silent. Even the fog seemed to hang motionless in the air. I stood there for 5 minutes listening, but whatever made that sound didn't repeat it. I kept climbing. What else could I do? I was still 4 miles from the ridge, and the trail down was longer than the trail up. Besides, I was starting to think maybe the old stories weren't just stories after all. If something was living up in this high country, something that shouldn't exist, then it was my job to document it. To protect these mountains, you had to understand what lived in them. The trail got steeper as it wound through a grove of ancient hemlocks. Some of these trees were 6 feet thick and 300 years old, older than the United States itself. Walking through them was like walking through a cathedral, if cathedrals were built of living wood and smelled of pine sap and rich earth. It was in this grove that I found the first body. Tommy Chen was a college student from Knoxville, 20 years old, studying wildlife biology at the University of Tennessee. I'd met him 2 weeks earlier when he'd registered for a backcountry camping permit. Smart kid, experienced hiker, the kind who knew better than to take stupid risks in the wilderness. He was hanging 12 feet off the ground, wedged in the fork of a massive hemlock. His backpack and gear were scattered on the ground below. But Tommy himself was bent at angles that human bodies aren't supposed to bend. His neck was twisted around so far that his face was looking back over his shoulder, and his arms were pulled out of their sockets. But here's the thing that made my hands shake as I took photos for my report. There were no claw marks on his body, no bite wounds, no blood. Whatever killed Tommy Chen had done it with bare hands, or something like hands, and incredible strength. I climbed the tree to get a closer look. Tommy's camping permit was still clipped to his jacket, dated 3 days ago. He should have been heading back down the mountain by now, but instead something had caught him, killed him, and wedged his body in this tree like a warning, like a scarecrow. I managed to get the body down and wrapped it in my emergency tarp. There was no way I could carry Tommy all the way back down the mountain, not 12 miles through rough terrain, but I couldn't leave him here either. So I cached him in a small cave I knew about, marked the location on my map, and promised myself I'd come back with help. The sun was getting low by the time I made it to Whispering Ridge itself. The ridge was a long, narrow spine of rock that ran east-west for about 2 miles, with steep drops on both sides. In good weather, you could see for 50 miles in every direction, but with the fog rolling in thick, I could barely see 20 feet. I set up my camp in a small clearing where the old Cherokee Trail crossed the ridge. It was a good spot, sheltered from the wind by a circle of ancient pines with fresh water from a natural spring that bubbled up through the rocks. My grandfather had shown me this place when I was 12, told me it was sacred ground, a place where his grandfather's grandfather had come to speak with the spirits of the mountain. As I gathered firewood in the fading light, I kept thinking about Tommy Chen's twisted body. Whatever killed him was strong enough to break human bones like twigs, but smart enough to hang the body where other hikers would be sure to find it. That suggested intelligence, planning, maybe even a sick sense of humor. I got my fire started just as full darkness settled over the ridge. The flames pushed back the fog and the cold, creating a small circle of warmth and light in the wilderness. I heated up a can of beans and made coffee with water from the spring. Normal camp routine, the kind of thing I'd done hundreds of times before. But this wasn't a normal night. As I sat by the fire, eating my simple meal, I could feel eyes watching me from the darkness beyond the firelight. Not animal eyes. I knew what it felt like to be watched by bears or wildcats. This was something else, something that understood what fire meant, what it meant for a human to be alone in the wilderness. The eyes moved in the darkness, circling my camp. Sometimes I caught glimpses of reflection in the firelight, set too high to be a bear, too wide apart to be human. Whatever was out there, it was big, and it was smart enough to stay just out of sight. I kept the fire burning bright and the pistol in my hand, but I never got a clear look at what was watching me. Around midnight, the sounds started. First, it was branches breaking in the forest, heavy footsteps moving through the underbrush. Then came the calls. Sounds like no animal I knew, but carrying across the mountain like voices trying to communicate. The calls came from different directions, sometimes close, sometimes far away, like a conversation in a language I didn't understand. I stayed awake all night, feeding the fire and list, keening to the sounds in the darkness. Whatever was out there, there was more than one of them, and they were talking to each other about me. Dawn came slow and gray through the fog, and with it came the silence again. Whatever had been circling my camp all night had vanished with the darkness, leaving only broken branches and strange footprints in the soft earth around the clearing. I packed up my camp quickly, eager to get moving. My plan was to check the trail markers on the eastern end of the ridge, then start the long hike back down to civilization. I'd report Tommy Chen's death, bring back a recovery team, and let someone else figure out what was living up in these high places. But the mountain had other plans for me. The trail markers on the eastern ridge were gone. Not fallen down, not damaged by weather. Gone. Pulled right out of the ground, broken into pieces, and scattered through the forest like kindling. 15 years of careful trail maintenance destroyed in a single night. As I documented the damage with my camera, I found more tracks. The same 15-inch prints I'd been seeing, but now there were different sizes. Some smaller, maybe 12 inches, others even larger than the first ones I'd found. A whole family of whatever these things were, working together to erase any sign of human presence on their mountain. That's when I found the second body. Maria Santos had been a botanist from the University of Georgia, up here doing research on rare mountain plants. I'd seen her permit application 2 months ago, knew she was planning to spend a week collecting specimens in the high country. She was 35, experienced in wilderness research, and careful about following safety protocols. I found her about a quarter-mile off the main trail in a grove of mountain laurel that was just starting to lose its leaves. Like Tommy, she showed no obvious wounds, but her body was arranged in a way that made my stomach turn. She was sitting upright against a tree, her arms positioned as if she was reaching out to embrace someone, but her spine was snap. In 2 places, and her head was tilted at an impossible angle. Her research equipment was scattered around her in a perfect circle, like someone had carefully placed each piece exactly where they wanted it. Her field notebooks were open to pages covered with detailed drawings of plants, but the drawings had been torn out. In their place, someone had pressed fresh leaves and flowers into the empty pages. But they were all plants that didn't grow at this elevation, shouldn't exist in these mountains at all. I took photos and made detailed notes, then wrapped Maria's body and cached it with Tommy's. 2 experienced wilderness researchers, both killed in ways that defied explanation. Whatever was up here, it was targeting people who came to study the mountain, people who might document its secrets. As I worked, I could feel those eyes on me again. Not hiding in the darkness this time, but watching from the fog-shrouded forest in broad daylight. The feeling was so strong that I kept spinning around, sure I'd catch a glimpse of whatever was stalking me, but I never saw more than shadows moving between the trees. The fog lifted briefly around noon, and that's when I got my first clear look at them. There were 3 of them, standing on a rocky outcrop about 200 yards away, perfectly still, watching me. They were huge, at least 8 feet tall and massively built, covered in dark hair or fur that made them blend into the shadows of the forest. Their faces were almost human, but wrong somehow, like someone had tried to sculpt a person from memory and gotten the proportions just slightly off. I raised my camera, but by the time I got it focused, they were gone, vanished into the forest without making a sound, despite their size. But I knew they were still out there, still watching. The afternoon brought worse discoveries. I found evidence of a hunting camp that had been systematically destroyed, tents torn to shreds, camping gear scattered and broken, but no bodies. Just blood on the rocks and drag marks leading into the thick rhododendron bushes where no human could follow. Then I found the cave. It was hidden behind a waterfall, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. My grandfather had shown it to me once, told me it was a place where the Cherokee had hidden during the worst of the removal wars. Sacred ground that should be left alone. The cave went back maybe 50 feet into the mountain, and the smell that came out of it was enough to make me gag. That same combination of wet fur and rotting meat, but concentrated, like something had been living in there for years. I got my flashlight and went in just far enough to see what was at the back of the cave. I wish I hadn't. There were bones. Human bones, animal bones, all mixed together in piles that reached almost to the ceiling. Some of the bones were old, bleached white by time, but others were fresh enough that scraps of meat still clung to them. And arranged on a flat shelf of rock like trophies were personal items that had belonged to the victims. Watches, rings, hiking boots, cameras. I recognized Maria's camera equipment, Tommy's University of Tennessee jacket, and dozens of other items that had belonged to people who had come up to these mountains over the years and never come back down. That's when I heard the growling behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and there it was. Standing in the mouth of the cave, blocking my only exit. 8.5 feet tall, covered in coarse black hair, with yellow eyes that reflected my flashlight like a cat's. Its face was almost human, but the jaw was too wide, the teeth too sharp, the brow ridge too heavy. It didn't attack right away. It just stood there, studying me with those intelligent yellow eyes, tilting its head like it was trying to figure out what I was doing in its home. When it finally spoke, its voice was like rocks grinding together, but the words were clear, "You shouldn't be here." I don't remember pulling my pistol, but suddenly it was in my hand, the barrel pointing at the creature's chest. "Neither should you," I managed to whisper. The creature made a sound that might have been laughter. "This is our mountain. Always has been. You are the intruders." It took a step toward me, and I could see the muscles bunching under its fur, could smell its breath, like meat that had been left out too long. I pulled the trigger. The gunshot was deafening in the confined space of the cave, and my bullet took the creature center mass. It staggered backward, dark blood spreading across its chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it looked down at the wound with what might have been surprise, then looked back up at me. "Hurts," it said, almost conversationally. Then it smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "But not enough." I ran. I made it out of the cave, and maybe 50 yards into the forest before they surrounded me. Not just the wounded one from the cave, but 6 or 7 others, all huge, all covered in that coarse, dark fur, all moving with a silence that should have been impossible for creatures their size. They formed a loose circle around me, just outside the range of my flashlight, close enough that I could smell them, hear their breathing, but far enough away that I couldn't get a clear shot at any of them. Smart, coordinated. This wasn't just a pack of wild animals hunting. This was a military operation. The wounded one came limping out of the cave, still bleeding from my bullet, but moving with purpose. It said something to the others in a language I didn't understand. A series of grunts and low calls that somehow managed to sound like words. They answered back, and I realized I was listening to a conversation about what to do with me. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't know this was your territory. I'll leave. I'll never come back." The wounded one looked at me with those yellow eyes. "You have seen too much. Taken pictures, made notes." It was right. I had photos of the footprints, the bodies, the destroyed campsite. Evidence that these creatures existed, that they had been killing hikers and researchers for years. Evidence that would bring hundreds of people up into these mountains, scientists and government agents and thrill seekers, all looking for the legendary wild men of the Smokies. "I'll destroy the photos," I said. "Burn my notes. Nobody has to know. Others will come. They always come. Looking for us. Hunting us." The circle was getting tighter. I could see them more clearly now in the beam of my flashlight. Not quite human, not quite animal, but something caught between the two. Their faces showed intelligence, sadness, and a kind of ancient weariness that made my heart ache even as my hands shook with fear. "How long have you been up here?" I asked. "Always," the wounded one said. "Before the Cherokee, before the white men, before the park. This is our home." I understood then. These weren't monsters, not really. They were survivors of something older than human memory, the last of their kind, hiding in the most remote corners of the wilderness. Every story, every legend, every sighting reported by hunters and hikers over the years, it was all real. The Cherokee had known about them, had respected their claim to the high country, had kept their secrets. But secrets don't stay buried forever. As more people came to the mountains, as technology made the wilderness smaller and more accessible, encounters became inevitable. And when hikers and researchers stumbled onto evidence of their existence, the creatures did what any intelligent species would do to protect itself. They eliminated the threat. "I'm a ranger," I said. "My job is to protect these mountains, to protect everything that lives here. You protect the trees, the bears, the pretty flowers." The wounded one's voice carried a bitter edge. "But not us. Never us. We are too dangerous. Too frightening." It was right again. Even if I wanted to protect them, how could I? How do you write a management plan for a species that officially doesn't exist? How do you create a protected habitat for creatures that survive by killing anyone who discovers them? The circle tightened again. I could reach out and touch the nearest one now, could see the individual hairs on its massive arms, could count the scars on its weathered hands, hands that had snapped Tommy Chen's neck, that had broken Maria Santos's spine, that had torn apart a dozen other people who had come too close to the truth. I have a daughter, I lied, desperate for anything that might create a connection, might make them see me as something more than just another threat to eliminate. She's only 8 years old. She needs her father. The wounded one tilted its head, studying me. You lie. You have no children. Wife died 4 years ago. Car accident. My blood went cold. They had been watching me for years, learning about me, studying my habits and routines. They knew more about my life than most of my human friends did. But you love these mountains, it continued, like we do. You walk alone, think alone. Most humans come in groups, make noise, frighten the animals. But you are different. I am, I said, sensing an opening. These mountains are my life. My family has been taking care of them for 3 generations. We understand that some things should be left alone. The creature closest to me reached out with one massive hand and touched my face, almost gently. Its palm was warm and rough, like tree bark, and its touch was surprisingly careful for something. Gee, so large and powerful. Your grandfather knew, it said. Old man with kind eyes. He saw us once. We let him live. He never told. My grandfather, the man who had taught me to love these mountains, who had shown me the hidden springs and secret trails, who had told me stories about the wild men that I'd never believed. He had known all along. He told me the mountains had their own guardians, I whispered. Said some places were meant to stay wild forever. Yes, guardians. We keep the deep places safe. Keep them the old ways alive. But now, the wounded one gestured at its bleeding chest. Now, you must choose. Choose what? Join us in guarding these mountains. Help us keep the secrets. Or... It didn't need to finish the sentence. The bones in the cave had made the alternative very clear. I looked around the circle of faces watching me, saw the intelligence in their eyes, the sadness, the desperate need to survive in a world that was shrinking around them every year. They weren't evil. They were just trying to protect their home, their family, their very existence. But they were asking me to become complicit in murder, to help them kill anyone who got too close to the truth, to abandon everything I believed about right and wrong, about protecting innocent people, about my duty as a ranger and a human being. I can't, I said finally. I won't help you kill people. The wounded one nodded slowly, as if it had expected this answer. Then, you understand what must happen. They all moved at once, faster than anything that big should be able to move. But instead of tearing me apart, they began to change. Their faces shifted. Their posture altered. Their fur seemed to melt and flow like water. Within seconds, I was surrounded by perfect duplicates of myself. 7 Ben Ashfords, all wearing my uniform, all carrying my equipment, all watching me with my own face. One of us will take your tool place, the wounded Ben said with my voice. Go back down the mountain. File the reports. Tell them you found nothing. And the real you will stay here forever. Guard the mountain like your grandfather should have. I raised my pistol, but which one should I shoot? They were all me, all perfect copies, all moving and speaking with my mannerisms. And I knew that even if I killed one, the others would overwhelm me before I could reload. Choose, they said in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that made my teeth ache. Die as yourself, or live as us. I closed my eyes, thought about my wife Sarah, about my grandfather, about all the people who had trusted me to protect these mountains. When I opened them again, I had made my decision. I pulled the trigger 6 times as fast as I could work the action. Each shot found its target, and the false versions of myself collapsed into piles of fur and shadow that dissolved into the fog. But when the gun clicked empty, the wounded one was still standing there, still bleeding, still watching me with those terrible yellow eyes. Brave, it said, almost admiringly, but foolish. It lunged at me with impossible speed, but my grandfather's training kicked in. Duck, roll, grab the fallen branch, swing hard at the knee joint. The creature howled and stumbled, giving me the seconds I needed to run. I ran through that forest like the devil himself was chasing me, and maybe he was. Branches tore at my clothes, rocks sent me sprawling, but I kept moving, kept putting distance between myself and the things that wanted to make me one of them. Behind me I could hear them calling to each other, organizing a pursuit. But I had one advantage. I knew these mountains better than anyone alive. I knew every trail, every shortcut, every hiding place my grandfather had shown me. It took me 8 hours to make it back to my truck. 8 hours of running and hiding and crawling through places no human was meant to go. When I finally reached the trailhead, my clothes were torn to rags and my hands were bleeding from scrambling over rocks in the darkness. I drove straight to the ranger station and filed my report. Missing hikers, probable bear attack, bodies cached for recovery, standard procedure for a wilderness fatality. I said nothing about what I'd really seen, nothing about the creatures that had killed Tommy Chen and Maria Santos. The recovery team went up 3 days later and found the bodies exactly where I'd said they would be. The official cause of death was listed as bear attack, though the medical examiner noted some unusual injuries that didn't quite fit the pattern. But mountain country is dangerous, and bears do strange things sometimes. Case closed. I stayed on as a ranger for 2 more years, but I never went back to Whispering Ridge. Every time I got an assignment that would take me into the high country, I found an excuse to send someone else. My supervisor thought I was getting old, losing my nerve for the dangerous trails. Maybe I was, or maybe I was just smart enough to know when I'd been warned. The disappearances continued, of course. Every year, a few hikers and researchers would go missing in the backcountry. Some were found eventually, killed by bears or accidents, but others simply vanished without a trace. The Park Service posted warnings about traveling alone, about the dangers of the wilderness. But people kept coming. They always do. I retired in 1985 and moved down to Knoxville, where the lights are bright and the trees don't whisper secrets in languages older than human speech. I got a job at a hardware store, married a nice woman named Beth, and tried to forget about the things that live in the high places. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is blowing down from the mountains, I can still hear them calling, still feel those yellow eyes watching me from the darkness, and I wonder if the thing earing my face ever made it back down to civilization. If somewhere there's another Ben Ashford filing reports and patrolling trails and keeping secrets that should never be kept. Last month, my grandson asked me to take him camping up on Whispering Ridge. He's 16 now, eager to learn about the mountains that have been in our family for 3 generations. I told him maybe next year when he's older, when he's ready. But the truth is, he'll never be ready. None of us are. Some places are meant to stay wild forever, and some secrets are meant to die with the people who discover them. The Watchers are still up there, keeping their ancient vigil, protecting their mountain home from the world that would destroy them if it knew they existed. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly as it should be. Sometimes I think about going back just once to see if they remember the ranger who got away. But I'm 64 years old now, and my knees aren't what they used to be. And I've seen enough monsters for one lifetime. The mountains can keep their secrets. I've got grandchildren to think about now, and they deserve a world where the only monsters are the ones in storybooks. But on nights like tonight, when the fog rolls down from the high country and I can smell pine sap and rhododendron on the wind, I remember what it felt like to stand face to face with something that shouldn't exist, something older and stronger and more dangerous than anything in the modern world. And I remember the choice they gave me, die as myself or live as them. I made the right choice, I'm sure of it. My name is Augustus Flintridge, but everyone calls me Gus. I've been a ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 22 years now, and I've seen things that would make most folks pack up and head back to town. But what happened up on Grandfather Mountain in March of '54? Well, that's something different entirely. I started working these mountains back in '32, right out of high school. Learned trail building from old-timers who could read rock like a book and move stone with nothing but hand tools and good sense. Did my time in Korea, too, building bridges and roads under fire. Came back with a head full of engineering know-how and hands that knew honest work. By '54, I was supervising trail crews all along the parkway. We'd take on the tough jobs. The high-elevation routes where the weather could turn mean in minutes, and the nearest road was a day's hike away. I liked it that way. Mountains don't lie to you. Rock is rock, dirt is dirt, and if you respect them both, they'll let you build something that lasts. The Rough Ridge project started that March, just as the last snow was melting off the peaks. We were supposed to build a connecting trail between the main parkway and some of the higher camping spots. Simple work, really. Clear brush, lay stone, build bridges over the streams. I had a good crew of 8 men, all locals who knew these mountains like their own backyards. Frank Morrison was my lead stone worker. Been with me 5 years, could split granite like it was kindling. Pete and Jim Hawkins, brothers who worked as a team moving the heavy rocks. Charlie Dunn handled our supplies, always knew where every tool was. The others, Tommy, Bill, Carl, and young Mickey, were good workers, steady hands when the weather turned rough. We set up base camp at about 4,000 feet, then hiked up another 1,000 to where the new trail would start. Took us 2 days jupos to get all our gear up there. Canvas tents, hand tools, surveying equipment, dynamite for the big rocks, and enough food for 2 weeks. No roads up that high, no way to get help fast if something went wrong. The worksite sat right on the edge of a granite ridge, looking out over miles of mountain peaks. Beautiful country, but hard country. Wind up there could knock a man down, and the temperature dropped 30 degrees once the sun went behind the peaks. At night you could hear the mountains settling, rocks shifting, trees creaking, sounds that made city folks nervous but meant nothing to us. First few days went smooth as butter. Weather held clear and cold, ground was firm enough to work, and the crew fell into their usual rhythm. Frank and the boys would break up the big stones while I ran the survey line with my transit, marking where the trail would go. Charlie kept the tools sharp and the coffee hot. That's when we found the first sculpture. I was running elevation shots about 50 yards ahead of the crew when I spotted something that didn't belong. Looked like a pile of white sticks at first, maybe left behind by some camper. But when I got closer, I could see it was bones. Lots of them, all different sizes, arranged in a careful pattern like a piece of artwork. Now, finding bones in the mountains isn't unusual. Bears, deer, even the occasional hiker who got lost and never made it home. But these bones were old, I mean really old. and they were arranged too neat, too purposeful. Someone had spent time on this, laying each bone just so, creating something that was almost pretty to look at. The bones themselves were strange too. Some looked like they came from bears, but bears 3 times bigger than any I'd seen. Others might have been wolves, except the skulls were too big, the teeth too long. I'd hunted these mountains my whole life and never seen bones like these. "Charlie," I called back to camp, "bring the camera up here." Charlie hiked up with our old Kodak, and we took pictures from every angle. Standard procedure when we found anything that might be Indian artifacts or historical remains. The Park Service wanted everything documented before we disturbed it. But looking through the camera lens, the bone sculpture looked different somehow, more alive. The shadows fell in ways that made the whole thing seem to move, like it was breathing. I shook my head and blamed it on the thin mountain air. "What do you think it is, boss?" Charlie asked, chewing on a piece of grass. "Some kind of Indian art, maybe," I said, though it didn't feel right saying it. The Cherokee had lived in these mountains for hundreds of years, but their artwork looked different from this. This felt older, hungrier. Should we move it? I studied the bone pile again. Our trail was supposed to run right past this spot. We'd have to disturb it one way or another. "We'll radio down to headquarters tomorrow," I decided. "Let the archaeology boys take a look first." That night, the wind picked up something fierce. Canvas tents snapped and strained against their ropes, and the temperature dropped so fast that ice formed on our water buckets. I'd been through plenty of mountain storms, but this one felt different, angrier. Around midnight, I heard something that made me sit up in my bedroll. Scraping sounds, like metal on stone, coming from the direction of the bone sculpture. Probably just the wind moving loose rocks, but it went on for hours. Scrape, 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 like someone working with careful, patient hands. Morning brought clear skies and calm air, but something had changed up on the ridge. The bone sculpture was still there, but it looked different, bigger, more elaborate. New bones had been added, fresher ones that gleamed white in the early sunlight. And there were more sculptures now, 3 of them, spaced evenly along our survey line like someone was marking territory. I stared at those new bone piles for a long time that morning, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. In 22 years of mountain work, I'd learned to trust what my eyes told me. Rock didn't move by itself. Animals didn't arrange bones in careful patterns. And fresh bones didn't just appear overnight on a ridge 5,000 feet above sea level. "Frank," I called over to my stoneworker, "come take a look at this." Frank ambled over, still carrying his splitting hammer. He was a practical man, never wasted words or energy. When he saw the bone sculptures, he just stood there, chewing his tobacco and thinking. "Weren't like that yesterday," he said finally. "No, they weren't. Someone's been up here in the night." I nodded, though that didn't make much sense either. We were 15 miles from the nearest road, through rough country that would be dangerous to travel in the dark. And who would haul fresh bones all the way up here just to make more art? "Maybe we got some kind of hermit living up here," Frank suggested. "Crazy mountain man type." It was possible. These mountains hid all kinds of folks who didn't want to be found. Still, something about the whole situation made my skin crawl. "Let's get the crew together," I said. "We need to talk about this." I gathered all 8 men around the breakfast fire and laid out the situation, showed them the photographs from yesterday, and pointed out the new sculptures that had appeared overnight. "Could be Indians," suggested Pete Hawkins. "Could be some nutcase," added his brother Jim. Young Mickey, who was only 19 and still jumped at mountain shadows, looked nervous. "What if it's something else? Something that ain't human?" The older men chuckled at that, but I noticed they weren't laughing very hard. "Whatever it is," I said, "we're going to handle it like professionals. We'll do our job, but we'll be careful. Nobody works alone. Nobody wanders off after dark. And if anyone sees anything strange, you sing out immediately." The crew nodded and went back to work, but I could tell they were spooked. Men worked closer together than usual, talked louder, kept glancing up at the ridge where the bone sculptures sat gleaming in the morning sun. We made good progress that first day despite the distraction. Cleared about 100 yards of trail line and laid the foundation stones for a small bridge over a creek. Hard, honest work that felt normal and real after the strangeness of the morning. But as the day wore on, I noticed other things that didn't sit right. My surveying instruments kept giving me readings that didn't match up. According to my transit, the ridge ahead of us was losing elevation, but my eyes clearly showed it climbing higher. The compass needle wandered like it couldn't find true north. Worst of all were the sounds. Every now and then, when the crew was making noise with hammers and saws, I'd catch something else underneath. A soft scraping, like someone working very carefully with delicate tools. But whenever I stopped the work to listen, the sound would stop too. By evening, everyone was on edge. We made camp in a tight circle, built the fire bigger than usual, and nobody strayed far from the light. Charlie broke out a deck of cards, and we played poker until well past our usual bedtime, none of us wanting to be the first to crawl into a tent alone. I was finally drifting off to sleep around midnight when Mickey started screaming. "Something's out there! Something's moving around the tents!" We all scrambled out with flashlights and tools, ready to fight off whatever was threatening the camp. But when we searched the area, we found nothing. No tracks, no signs of disturbance, no indication that anything had been near our camp at all. "Just nerves," Frank said, but he didn't sound convinced. "I know what I saw," Mickey insisted. "Something tall, real tall, moving around like it was looking for something." We searched for another hour but found nothing. Eventually, everyone went back to bed, but I stayed up the rest of the night keeping watch. Saw nothing, heard nothing except the usual mountain sounds. But when dawn came, Frank was gone. We found his tent empty, sleeping bag thrown aside like he'd left in a hurry. His boots were still there, his clothes, his personal gear, everything except Frank himself. "Frank!" I called out, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. "Frank Morrison!" The whole crew spread out, searching in every direction. We combed that ridge for hours, calling his name, looking for any sign of where he might have gone. 8 experienced woodsmen searching every inch of ground, and we found nothing. No tracks, no disturbed vegetation, no indication of which direction he'd traveled. It was Tommy who found him. Boss, you need to see this." Tommy's voice was shaky, scared in a way I'd never heard before. I ran toward the sound and found him standing about 50 yards from camp, staring at something ahead of him. Frank was there, all right, standing perfectly still in the middle of a small clearing, his back to us. He wore only his long underwear, no shoes, no shirt, no protection against the cold mountain air. "Frank," I called out, "what the hell are you doing out here?" He didn't answer, didn't move at all. I walked closer, motioning for the others to stay back. "Frank, you okay, buddy?" When I got close enough to see his face, my blood turned to ice water. Frank was staring straight ahead with wide, terrified eyes. His mouth was open like he was screaming, but no sound came out. And his body, Jesus, his body was all wrong. His arms hung at impossible angles like someone had taken them apart and put them back together incorrectly. His legs were bent in ways that human legs aren't supposed to bend. Even his face looked different, longer somehow, stretched like clay that had been pulled by artistic hands. But he was alive. I could see him breathing, could see his eyes tracking movement, blinking, showing that Frank Morrison was still in there somewhere, trapped in a body that had been reshaped like a piece of sculpture. "Get the first aid kit," I shouted. "And the radio, we need to get him out of here." But when I reached out to touch Frank's shoulder, he crumbled. Not fell down, crumbled, like he was made of dried clay that couldn't hold its shape anymore. In seconds, there was nothing left but a pile of bones arranged in a careful, artistic pattern. The same white, gleaming bones that made up the sculptures we'd been finding all along. The crew stood around Frank's remains in dead silence. 8 grown men who'd seen their share of mountain accidents, mining cave-ins, and construction injuries, all struck dumb by what we'd just witnessed. Charlie was the first to find his voice. That wasn't natural, boss." No kidding, I thought, but kept it to myself. These men were looking to me to make sense of something that had no sense to it. In all my years of engineering and construction, I'd learned that every problem had a logical solution. You just had to think it through step by step. But this was outside anything I'd ever learned to handle. We're packing up, I decided. Right now, leave the heavy equipment, take only what we can carry. We'll come back with a bigger crew and proper investigation gear. What about Frank? Mickey asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked down at the bones that had been my friend and coworker just minutes before. They were arranged in the same careful pattern as all the others, like someone had taken time to create something beautiful from human remains. We'll mark the spot, I said. Come back for him later. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Whatever force was at work on this mountain, it wasn't going to let us just walk away. I could feel it watching us, studying us, deciding which one of us would be next. We broke camp in record time, stuffing essentials into backpacks and leaving everything else behind. My surveying equipment, worth more than most men made in a year, stayed in the tent. The dynamite, the tools, the food supplies, all of it abandoned in our rush to get off that ridge. But as we started down the trail toward the lower elevations, I realized we had a problem. The trail we'd hiked up 3 days ago was gone, not overgrown or washed out, just gone. Where there should have been a clear path through the trees, there was nothing but untouched forest. No blazes on the trees, no cleared ground, no signs that human feet had ever passed this way. That ain't right, Jim Hawkins said, panic creeping into his voice. We came up this way. I remember that rock formation, that dead tree. The trail was right here. I checked my compass, but the needle spun in lazy circles, unable to find magnetic north. My map showed us in the middle of empty wilderness, miles from any marked trail or road. Stay calm, I told the crew, though my own heart was hammering in my chest. We'll navigate by landmarks, work our way down to the valley. Mountains haven't moved. We just got turned around somehow. We spent the next 6 hours trying to find a way down off that ridge. Every direction we tried led to dead ends. Cliff faces that shouldn't have been there, ravines that didn't appear on any map, dense thickets that seemed to grow thicker as we approached them. Worst of all, we kept finding more bone sculptures, dozens of them arranged in a rough circle around the entire ridge. Some were simple piles like we'd seen before. Others were elaborate constructions that looked almost human in shape. Standing figures with long arms and twisted spines watching us with empty eye sockets. As evening approached, we had to face the truth. We weren't getting off that mountain anytime soon. We'll make camp here for the night, I decided, pointing to a small clearing that often read some protection from the wind. Tomorrow we'll try a different approach. Nobody argued, but I could see the fear in their faces. We all knew something was hunting us, playing with us, keeping us trapped up here for its own purposes. We built a fire in the center of the clearing and arranged our sleeping bags in a tight circle around it. No tents this time. I wanted everyone visible, everyone accounted for. We took turns on watch duty, 2 men at a time, keeping the fire burning bright through the long mountain night. Around midnight, during my watch shift, I heard the scraping sounds again, but this time they were closer, circling our camp like a predator studying its prey. I woke the other men quietly, and we sat in the firelight listening to something moving just outside the edge of our vision. The sounds were deliberate, artistic, like someone carving delicate details with precise tools. Sometimes they'd stop for long minutes, then resume from a different direction. Whatever was out there was patient, methodical, taking its time to create something perfect. There, Mickey whispered, pointing into the darkness beyond the fire. I saw it. We all strained our eyes, searching the shadows between the trees. For a moment, I thought I caught a glimpse of something tall and thin, moving with the fluid grace of an artist at work. Then it was gone, leaving only the scraping sounds and our own fear. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. When the sun finally rose above the mountain peaks, we discovered that 3 more men were missing. Pete and Jim Hawkins, who'd been sharing the last watch shift, and Tommy, who'd been sleeping between Mickey and Charlie, just 6 feet from the fire. All 3 gone without a sound, without a struggle, without leaving any trace of how they'd disappeared. But we found them an hour later, arranged as a group sculpture in another clearing about 100 yards from our camp. They were still alive. Pete stood in the center, his body stretched impossibly tall and thin, arms raised above his head in a pose of artistic agony. His Brata, her Jim, knelt at his feet, spine curved in a graceful arch, head thrown back as if singing a silent song. Tommy was positioned off to one side, his limbs twisted into abstract angles that somehow seemed beautiful despite their impossibility. All three were conscious. Their eyes tracked our movement, showed recognition and desperate pleading. But like Frank before them, they couldn't move or speak. They'd been transformed into living art, trapped forever in poses of perfect, terrible beauty. "We have to help them," Mickey said, starting toward the sculpture. I grabbed his arm, holding him back. "Don't touch them. Remember what happened to Frank." As we watched, the three men began to slowly change. Their bones shifted beneath their skin like clay being molded by invisible hands. Their features rearranged themselves into more pleasing proportions. The artist wasn't finished with them yet. That's when I finally saw our tormentor clearly. It emerged from the tree line behind the sculpture, a figure 12 feet tall and impossibly thin, moving with the flowing grace of water or wind. Its limbs were elongated like the victims it created, fingers stretched into delicate tools perfect for detailed carving work. Its face was a blank canvas of smooth bone, featureless except for dark hollows where eyes should be. The bone sculptor, I thought. That's what it was. An artist that used living flesh as its medium, human suffering as its inspiration. It noticed us watching and paused in its work, tilting its head in our direction. Even from 100 yards away, I could feel its attention like ice water in my veins. It was studying us, deciding which of us would become its next masterpiece. Then it smiled. Somehow, impossibly, that blank face managed to convey artistic satisfaction and hungry anticipation. The remaining crew, myself, Charlie, Bill, Carl, and Mickey, ran like hell. We stumbled through the forest in blind panic, crashing through underbrush and scrambling over fallen logs. Behind us, that awful scraping sound followed like the patient footsteps of death itself. The bone sculptor wasn't chasing us. It was hurting us. Every time we tried to veer off in a new direction, we'd find our path blocked by more sculptures, bone arrangements that seemed to point us toward some predetermined destination. The creature was driving us somewhere specific, and we had no choice but to go. After an hour of desperate flight, we burst into a large natural amphitheater carved into the mountainside. And there, spread out before us, was the most horrible and beautiful sight I'd ever seen. The Bone Sculptor's Gallery. Hundreds of sculptures filled the space, each one a human being transformed into living art. Men, women, children, all arranged in poses of exquisite agony, their bodies reshaped into impossible beauty. Some looked fresh, newly made. Others were weathered by age, suggesting this creature had been at work for decades, maybe centuries. And all of them were still alive, conscious, aware. Their eyes followed us as we stumbled into the gallery, pleading silently for release that would never come. These weren't just victims. They were the bone sculptor's prized collection, preserved forever in moments of perfect artistic expression. "Sweet Jesus," Charlie whispered. "How long have they been like this?" Some of the sculptures were dressed in clothing from different eras: frontier buckskins, Civil War uniforms, clothes I recognized from the 1920s and 30s. The bone sculptor had been collecting subjects from these mountains for generations, building its gallery one victim at a time. The creature itself stood at the center of the amphitheater, positioned behind what looked like a massive bone easel. It was working on something new, a sculpture of a family, parents and children arranged in a loving embrace that had been twisted into something both beautiful and heartbreaking. When it saw us enter the gallery, the bone sculptor it down its tools and turned in our direction. This close, I could see that its entire body was covered in intricate carving, decorative patterns that shifted and moved like living artwork. It had remade itself countless times, each transformation making it more perfect, more terrible. It gestured toward us with one impossibly long finger, and I felt something change in my body. My bones began to soften, becoming pliable as clay. The paralysis that had claimed my crew was reaching for me too, starting in my fingertips and creeping up my arms. "Boss!" Mickey screamed. "Your hands!" I looked down and watched my fingers beginning to stretch, bones reshaping themselves according to the creature's artistic vision. In minutes, maybe seconds, I'd be just another sculpture in its collection. That's when I remembered the dynamite. We'd left most of our supplies back at the original campsite, but I still carried blasting caps in my jacket pocket. Old habit from years of trail construction. The caps weren't much by themselves, but if I could reach the main charges we'd abandoned. "Mickey!" I shouted, fighting against the spreading paralysis. "The camp! Get to the camp and bring back the dynamite!" The kid understood immediately. While the bone sculptor was focused on transforming me into its latest masterpiece, Mickey slipped away into the forest. The creature either didn't notice or didn't care. It was too absorbed in its artistic work to pay attention to one fleeing victim. I tried to buy Mickey time by fighting the transformation, but it was like trying to stop the tide with my bare hands. My bones continued to soften and reshape, my body bending into poses that would have been agonizing if I could still feel pain. The bone sculptor worked with the patience of centuries, adjusting every detail to achieve perfect artistic balance. Around the gallery, hundreds of victims watched my transformation with eyes full of desperate hope. They'd been waiting decades for someone to end their eternal suffering, and I was their last chance. Mickey made it back just as the creature was putting finishing touches on my new form. The kid had somehow managed to carry 6 sticks of dynamite and a whole roll of fuse line, enough explosive to bring down half the mountainside. "Light it!" I managed to gasp through lips that were no longer entirely my own. Mickey struck a match and touched it to the fuse. The flame raced along the line toward the charges he'd arranged around the gallery, giving us maybe 30 seconds before the whole place came down. The bone sculptor finally noticed what was happening. It spun toward Mickey with inhuman speed, those long arms reaching out to transform him into art before he could destroy its precious collection. But Mickey was already running, and I found the strength for one last act of rebellion. I threw myself forward, still partially paralyzed, and tackled the creature around its impossibly thin waist. We went down together in a tangle of reshaping bone and flowing limbs. The bone sculptor's touch sent waves of artistic transformation through my body, reshaping me even as I held on. But I'd been an engineer for 22 years, and I knew exactly how long that fuse would take to burn. 28 seconds. The explosion, when it came, was bigger than I'd expected. The dynamite not only brought down the gallery walls, but triggered a massive rock slide that buried the entire amphitheater under tons of granite. The bone sculptor's scream, a sound like breaking glass and dying wind, was cut off as the mountain collapsed on top of us both. I should have died in that rock slide. By all rights, I should have been crushed along with the creature and its horrible collection. But somehow, impossibly, I found myself thrown clear of the avalanche, landing hard in a patch of snow a quarter-mile away. Mickey found me there an hour later, unconscious but alive. My body was still partly transformed. My left arm remained twisted into an artistic curve, and my spine had a graceful arch that would never straighten. But I was human again mostly, and I was free. The official report called it a geological survey accident. Unstable rock formation, improper use of explosives, tragic loss of 7 experienced workers. The families got death benefits, and the trail project was permanently canceled due to hazardous terrain conditions. Mickey never talked about what really happened up there. Kid was smart enough to know that some stories are too dangerous to tell. He left the Park Service a month later, moved to Florida, and as far as I know, never came back to the mountains. I stayed on for another 2 years, but my heart wasn't in the work anymore. Every time I looked at a mountain, I saw potential sculptures. Every arrangement of rocks or fallen logs looked like it might be artistic, might be alive, might be watching me with trapped, desperate eyes. The worst part was the dreams. Every night I'd find myself back in that gallery, surrounded by hundreds of living sculptures. And in the dreams, I could hear them whispering. Not just the victims I'd failed to save, but new voices, fresh voices, people who'd wandered into those mountains after the rock slide and never come back out. Because the bone sculptor wasn't dead. Not really. I'd buried it under a mountain of stone, but creatures like that don't die the way normal things do. They wait, they rebuild, they find new ways to practice their terrible art. I retired in '56 and moved down to Asheville, as far from the high mountains as I could get while still calling North Carolina home. Took up drinking pretty seriously for a while, trying to forget what I'd seen up there. Eventually found work as a construction foreman, building houses and shopping centers. Things that were purely human, purely functional, with no artistic pretensions whatsoever. But I kept track of the missing persons reports from the mountain counties. Every year, a few hikers would vanish in the high country around Grandfather Mountain. Experienced. Woodsmen who knew better than to take risks. Families on camping trips who simply never came home. Hunters who walked into the forest and disappeared without a trace. The search parties never found bodies, never found any sign of what might have happened to those people. The mountains just swallowed them up, the way mountains sometimes do. But I knew better. I knew they'd found their way to a new gallery, a new collection being built by patient artistic hands somewhere deep in the hidden places of the Blue Ridge. The bone sculptor was working again, creating new masterpieces from living flesh, adding to its exhibition one victim at a time. Sometimes on clear nights when the wind comes down from the high peaks, I can still hear that scraping sound. Delicate tools working on resistant materials, shaping human suffering into something terrible and beautiful. And sometimes, God help me, I find myself wondering what it would be like to see the finished work. What kind of masterpiece could an immortal artist create, given enough time and materials? What would it look like to see human pain transformed into perfect, eternal beauty? Those are dangerous thoughts for an old man to have. Thoughts that might lead someone to pack a bag and drive north toward the mountains, looking for trails that aren't on any map, searching for galleries hidden in stone amphitheaters where the admission price is everything you are and everything you'll ever be. But I'm too old for that kind of adventure now. My bones are brittle, my hands shake, and my eyesight isn't what it used to be. I wouldn't make very good artistic material anymore. Still, on nights when sleep won't come, I find myself staring north toward the mountains and wondering if somewhere up there Frank Morrison is still standing in perfect, agonized pose, waiting for someone to see his transformation and appreciate the artistry that was forced upon him. Art isn't always beautiful, you see. Sometimes it's just hungry, and sometimes it's still looking for new subjects to complete its collection. If you're planning to hike the high country around Grandfather Mountain, might I suggest you stick to the marked trails? And if you happen to find some old bones arranged in careful patterns, well, maybe it's best not to look too closely. Some galleries are better left unvisited. Some artists should never be disturbed at their work. My name is Cordelia Songbird, but everyone calls me Cord. I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 7 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these old mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, sudden storms that could kill you if you weren't careful. But I was wrong. It's October 1967, and the leaves are turning gold and red like fire across the mountainsides. My job isn't just keeping people safe. I document the old mountain culture before it disappears forever. The Smithsonian folks up in Washington sent me special recording equipment, the kind that picks up every little sound. I've recorded over 300 traditional songs from the families who've lived in these mountains for generations. Before I became a ranger, I taught music in a little school down in the valley. I know harmony, I know how voices blend together, and I know the difference between real singing and wind through the trees. That's important to remember. My station is way back in the mountains, 12 miles by horseback from the nearest settlement. It's called Cataract Falls, named for the waterfall that drops 90 feet into a pool so clear you can see the bottom. But what makes this place special is the old chapel. The chapel was built sometime in the 1800s by a mountain congregation. It's made of local stone, and the way it sits in a natural bowl between the hills makes it perfect for singing. The sound carries and echoes in ways that would make a professional opera house jealous. The congregation died out during the Civil War. Disease, folks say. Smallpox took them all in 1863. Now it's just ruins. The roof fell in decades ago, but the stone walls still stand about shoulder high. Wildflowers grow where the altar used to be, and moss covers the old wooden pews. It's peaceful during the day, the kind of place that makes you want to sit quiet and think about the people who used to worship there. But at night, things change. The reports started coming in about 3 weeks ago. Hikers camping near the falls said they heard singing coming from the chapel ruins. Not just one voice, but a whole choir. Perfect 4-part harmony, they said. The kind of singing that gives you goosebumps and makes your eyes water. The first couple of times I figured it was just the wind. These mountains play tricks with sound, especially around the falls. Air moving through the ruins could sound like voices if you weren't paying attention. But the reports kept coming. Always the same thing. A full choir singing hymns at exactly midnight. So I decided to investigate. That's my job, after all. Document the culture, solve the mysteries, keep people safe. I loaded up my pack with the recording equipment, enough food for 3 days, and my sleeping bag. I planned to camp right there by the chapel and find out what was really going on. The ride up to Cataract Falls took most of the afternoon. My horse, Belle, seemed nervous as we got closer to the ruins. Her ears kept twitching, and she shied at shadows that didn't worry her before. Animals know things we don't, my grandmother always said. Maybe I should have listened. I set up camp about 50 yards from the chapel, close enough to hear everything but far enough away to feel safe. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky purple and gold. The waterfall sounded louder in the evening air, like it was trying to drown out something else. I had my dinner and checked my equipment one more time. The tape recorder was military surplus, the kind they use for important recordings. 2 microphones, extra tape reels, battery packs that would run all night. If there was really singing coming from those ruins, I was going to catch it. As darkness fell, Belle moved closer to my tent. She'd never done that before. Usually she was happy to graze and sleep under the stars. But tonight she wanted to stay close to the fire. At 11:30, I turned on the recorder and set it to run, continuously. The microphones pointed toward the chapel ruins. All I had to do was wait. The temperature started dropping around 11:45, not the gradual cooling you'd expect after sunset, but a sudden chill that made me pull my jacket tighter. My breath started showing in the air, even though it had been warm just minutes before. Then, at exactly midnight, the singing began. I've heard a lot of mountain singing in my time. Church choirs, family gatherings, old folks teaching their grandchildren the songs their grandparents taught them. But this was different. This was perfect. 4 voices, maybe more, blending together like they'd been singing together their whole lives. The harmony was so pure, it made my chest ache. They were singing Amazing Grace, but not the way most people sing it. This was the old way, the mountain way, with notes that bent and twisted like water flowing over rocks. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, just listening. The hair on my arms was standing up, and not just from the cold. This was the kind of singing that reaches right into your soul and grabs hold. But when I looked toward the chapel, I couldn't see anyone. The moonlight was bright enough to show the ruins clearly, and they were empty. No people, no campfire, nothing that would explain the voices. That's when I remembered the recorder. I checked the levels. The needles were dancing, picking up every note. Whatever was happening, the equipment was capturing it. The singing went on for exactly 1 hour. When it stopped, the temperature started climbing back to normal, and Belle relaxed enough to start grazing again. I played back the recording, expecting to hear the same beautiful harmony. Instead, I heard something that made my blood freeze. The voices were there, but they were singing different words. Not English, not Cherokee, not any language I'd ever heard. The melody was It's the same, but the words sounded ancient, like something from before people had names for things. I played it again, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake. But no, what I'd heard with my own ears and what the tape picked up were completely different. The next morning, I hiked down to Emmett Caldwell's place. Emmett was about the best traditional singer in these mountains, and he knew more old songs than anyone alive. If anybody could help me figure out what I'd recorded, it would be him. Emmett lived in a cabin his great-grandfather had built with a front porch that looked out over 3 valleys. He was sitting there when I rode up, working on a dulcimer and humming an old ballad. "Morning, Cord," he said, not looking up from his work. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I almost laughed at that. "Maybe I have, Emmett. I need you to listen to something." I set up the portable player and put on the tape from the night before. Emmett stopped working on his dulcimer and listened with the kind of attention he usually saved for the oldest songs. When it finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Play it again," he said. I did. This time I watched his face. His expression changed from curious to confused to something that looked almost like fear. "Cord," he said when it finished the second time, "where did you record this?" "Up at the old chapel ruins, last night at midnight." "Emmett, have you ever heard language like that?" He set down his dulcimer and looked out over the valleys. "My grandmother told stories," he said slowly. "Stories about the old congregation at Cataract Falls. Said they had their own way of singing, their own words that came from before the settlers, before the Cherokee even. Said when the smallpox took them, they died singing." "That's just stories, Emmett." "Maybe." He was quiet again, then looked at me with serious eyes. "But I'd like to hear it for myself, in person." I should have said no. I should have told him it was too dangerous, that we didn't know what we were dealing with. But the truth was, I wanted someone else there. I wanted another set of ears, someone who understood music the way I did. "All right," I said, "but we go prepared. Extra equipment, extra supplies, and if anything feels wrong, we leave." We agreed to meet at the falls the next evening. Emmett would bring his own instruments and recording equipment, and we'd set up a proper observation post. That night, back at the chapel, I heard them again. But this time, there were more voices, maybe 6 or 7, all blending in harmony so perfect it hurt to listen to. And this time, I thought I saw something. Just for a second, in the moonlight, I saw shapes in the chapel ruins. People-shaped shadows sitting in the broken pews, their mouths open in song. When I blinked and looked again, they were gone. The recording that night was even stranger. The voices were clearer, but the language was even more foreign. And underneath it all, I could hear something else, a sound like wind, but wind that was trying to form words. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that perfect harmony echoing in my head. It was beautiful, but there was something wrong with it, something that made my skin crawl even as it made my heart race. When Emmett arrived the next evening, he took one look at me and frowned. "You look terrible," he said. "When's the last time you slept?" "I slept," I lied, just thinking about those recordings. We set up our equipment as the sun was setting. Emmett had brought his grandfather's fiddle and a mountain dulcimer, along with his own tape recorder. We had microphones pointing at the chapel from 3 different angles. "If there's really something supernatural going on," Emmett said, "we'll have proof from every direction." As midnight approached, the temperature started dropping again. But this time, I was ready for it. I had a thermometer, and I watched it fall from 62 degrees to 38 in less than 10 minutes. "Jesus," Emmett whispered, pulling his jacket tighter. "You feel that?" I nodded. Then the singing started, and Emmett's eyes went wide. It was even more beautiful than before. 8 voices now, maybe 10, all weaving together in harmonies that seemed to come from heaven itself. Emmett was staring at the chapel ruins, his mouth slightly open. "Cord," he whispered, "look." I followed his gaze and felt my heart stop. There were figures in the ruins, transparent, glowing slightly in the moonlight, but definitely there. Men and women in old-fashioned clothes, sitting in rows like they were in church. Their mouths were open, and the singing was coming from them. "We're seeing ghosts," I whispered. "No," Emmett said, and his voice sounded strange. "We're seeing angels." The singing went on for 2 hours that night. 2 full hours of the most beautiful music I'd ever heard, while we watched the spirits of a long-dead congregation perform their eternal worship service. When it finally ended and the ghostly figures faded away, Emmett was changed. He kept humming pieces of what we'd heard, trying to capture the melodies. His eyes had a distant look, like he was seeing something I couldn't. "We have to come back," he said as we packed up the equipment. "We have to learn those songs. Emmett, those people are dead. They died over 100 years ago. But the music is alive," he said. "It's the most perfect music ever made, and it's just sitting up here in the mountains where nobody can hear it." I didn't like the way he was talking, but I understood the feeling. The singing was incredible, pure and perfect in a way that human voices shouldn't be able to achieve. We went back the next night, and the next. Each time, there were more spirits in the congregation. Each time, the singing was more complex, more beautiful. And each time, Emmett seemed yet more obsessed. On the 4th night, something new happened. The ghostly choir master, a tall man in a black coat who stood at the front of the congregation, turned and looked directly at us. He smiled and beckoned. "He wants us to join them," Emmett whispered, and he started to stand up. I grabbed his arm. "No, we're here to observe, not participate." But Emmett was strong, and the pull of that music was stronger. He shook me off and walked toward the ruins. The ghostly choir master kept smiling and beckoning, and the rest of the congregation turned to watch. "Emmett, stop!" But he was already climbing over the broken wall into the chapel. The moment his feet touched the ground inside the ruins, something terrible happened. His throat began to change. It stretched, growing longer and thinner, like his neck was being pulled by invisible hands. His voice changed too, becoming higher and purer than any human voice should be. He started singing along with the ghostly choir, hitting notes that should have been impossible. I ran toward the chapel, but the choir master held up one translucent hand, and I stopped cold. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't move. My muscles just wouldn't obey. Emmett sang for maybe 20 minutes, his voice blending perfectly with the spirits around him. But his face was changing too, becoming pale and distant. His eyes lost their warmth and started to glow with the same faint light as the ghosts. When the singing finally stopped, Emmett collapsed. I could move again, and I rushed into the chapel to help him. But when I touched his throat, it felt wrong, too long, too thin, like the cartilage had been stretched beyond human limits. "Emmett, can you hear me?" He opened his eyes, but they weren't his eyes anymore. They had that same distant glow as the spirits. "The music," he whispered, and his voice was different, higher, more ethereal. "I can hear all of it now. Every note, every harmony. It's beautiful, Cord. It's so beautiful." I got him back to his cabin, but he wasn't the same. He spent the next 3 days trying to sing the songs he'd learned from the ghostly choir. But his human throat couldn't handle the strain. By the end of the 3rd day, his voice was gone entirely. Just a whisper of air when he tried to speak. That should have been enough to keep me away from the chapel, but it wasn't. I went back the next night, alone. I told myself I was just documenting what was happening, gathering evidence. But the truth was, I was drawn to that music the same way Emmett had been. The ghostly congregation was larger now, maybe 30 spirits, all singing in perfect harmony. And at the front, I saw a new figure that made my heart stop. It was Emmett. He was translucent like the others, glowing with that same faint light. His throat was impossibly long and thin, and when he sang, his voice was pure and perfect and completely inhuman. He looked at me and smiled. But it wasn't Emmett's smile. It was the smile of something that had never been alive. The choir master beckoned to me again, and this time I understood what was really happening. The congregation hadn't just died of smallpox. They had died singing, and their voices had been trapped here, creating some kind of supernatural collection. They were gathering singers, adding new voices to their eternal choir. And they wanted mine. I started to back away, but the music followed me. Not just the sound. The actual musical notes seemed to wrap around me like invisible chains. My throat started to tingle, and I realized I was humming along without meaning to. The humming became singing, and the singing became something more. I could feel my voice changing, becoming purer and more beautiful than it had ever been. But I could also feel something else, something inside me stretching and twisting, trying to reshape itself to produce impossible sounds. The ghostly congregation was calling to me, welcoming me. All I had to do was step into, the chapel ruins and join them. I would be able to sing forever, to create music more beautiful than anything humans had ever made. All I had to do was die. I fought against the pull of the music, but it was like trying to swim upstream in a raging river. My feet started moving toward the chapel without my permission. My voice kept singing notes I'd never learned in a language I'd never heard. The choir master was smiling wider now, his arms outstretched in welcome. The rest of the congregation was singing louder, their voices wrapping around me like a net made of sound, 20 feet from the chapel walls. 15. 10. My throat was starting to hurt, stretching to accommodate the supernatural music. But the pain felt distant, unimportant. All that mattered was the singing, the harmony, the perfect blend of voices that would last forever. 5 feet from the broken wall. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. Sometimes the only way to fight music is with noise. I bit down on my tongue as hard as I could. The pain was sharp and sudden, and it broke the musical spell just long enough for me to think clearly. The ghostly choir was still singing, still calling to me. But now I could see what they really were, not angels, not even spirits. They were something else, something that fed on music and voices and the life force of singers. I fumbled in my pack for the one thing I'd brought that had nothing to do with recording or documenting, my grandmother's old wooden whistle, the one she'd carved from mountain laurel when I was a child. It was simple and crude and made terrible, discordant sounds when you blew it wrong. I put it to my lips and blew as hard as I could. The sound that came out was awful, a shrill, tuneless screech that clashed with every note the ghostly choir was singing. The effect was immediate. The spirits wavered like heat waves, their perfect harmony disrupted by the chaos of noise. The choirmaster's smile turned to a snarl. He pointed at me, and I felt the musical compulsion return, stronger than before. My throat started stretching again, and I could feel my vocal cords reshaping themselves to match the supernatural requirements, but I kept blowing the whistle, adding chaos to their perfect order. The ghostly congregation was singing louder now, trying to drown out my discordant noise. But harmony can't exist without order, and I was bringing pure musical chaos into their system. Some of the spirits started to fade. The newer ones, including the thing that had been Emmett, flickered like candle flames in the wind. They were losing cohesion, their perfect forms breaking apart. The choir master raised both hands, and suddenly I couldn't breathe. The air around me thickened like molasses, and my lungs couldn't pull it in. I was suffocating, but I kept the whistle pressed to my lips. That's when I realized something important. The chapel itself was part of the trap. The perfect acoustics, the natural amplification, it was all designed to collect and preserve voices. The spirits weren't just haunting the place. They were part of its structure now, woven into the stone and wood and air. If I could disrupt the harmony completely, I might be able to break the whole system. I pulled out my harmonica, the cheap metal one I'd carried since childhood. It was tuned differently from standard instruments, with bent notes and blue scales that would clash horribly with traditional hymns. Playing both instruments at once was awkward, but I managed it. The whistle's shrill scream and the harmonica's wailing blues created a wall of noise that attacked the ghostly choir from two different directions. The spirits were definitely fading now. The older ones, who had been there since 1863, were holding together better, but even they were starting to look unstable. Their perfect formation was breaking down as individual voices began to separate from the collective harmony. The choir master was first. He opened his mouth wider than any human mouth could open, and a sound came out that was less singing than screaming. It was the sound of 100 voices, all trying to sing different songs at the same time, beautiful and horrible and completely mad. The sound hit me like a physical force, knocking me backward. My ears started bleeding and I could feel something tearing in my throat. But I didn't stop playing. Other spirits were joining the choir master now, abandoning their beautiful hymns for chaotic noise. They were trying to fight chaos with chaos, but they didn't understand. Harmony was their strength, and without it, they were just random sounds with no power. I added a third instrument, my grandmother's old wooden spoons, clicking them together in a rhythm that had nothing to do with the music around me. The percussion was simple but effective, another layer of disorder in their perfect system. The chapel itself started to react. The stone walls began to crack, hairline fractures spreading from the foundation upward. The acoustic properties that made the place perfect for singing were being damaged by the discordant noise. That's when the choir master made his final attack. Instead of trying to compel me with music, he reached out with ghostly hands and grabbed my throat directly. His touch was like ice and fire at the same time. I could feel my vocal cords stretching, reshaping themselves to match the supernatural requirements of the choir. But I could also feel something else, his desperation. He needed my voice to stabilize the harmony that was falling apart around him. I couldn't play instruments with hands around my throat, but I could still make noise. I started screaming, not singing, not trying for any kind of beauty, just pure human noise, raw and ugly and completely alive. The choir master's grip loosened. He was a creature of perfect music, and raw human emotion was foreign to him. My scream was chaos, but it was also life, and that was something his long-dead congregation couldn't understand or absorb. The other spirits were solving now, their forms breaking apart like smoke in a strong wind. The newest ones went first, including Emmett's ghostly form. As he faded, I saw something in his eyes that might have been gratitude. The older spirits lasted longer, but they were losing cohesion too. Their perfect shapes were becoming rough and indistinct, their beautiful voices turning to whispers and sighs. The choir master held on the longest. Even as the chapel walls cracked and crumbled around him, even as his congregation faded into nothing, he kept trying to sing. But his voice was alone now, and a solo can't create harmony. When he finally dissolved, the silence was absolute. The chapel collapsed completely about an hour later. The walls that had stood for over a century crumbled like sand, and the perfect acoustics were buried under tons of stone and earth. Whatever supernatural force had preserved the place was gone, and natural decay finally claimed it. I made it back down the mountain just as the sun was rising. My throat felt like I'd swallowed broken glass, and my voice was gone completely, not lost like Emmett's, but damaged by the strain of fighting supernatural forces. The official report blamed the chapel's collapse on seismic activity. The geology folks from the university came up and found evidence of minor earth movement, enough to explain why century-old stone walls might suddenly give way. Nobody questioned it. Emmett's body was found in his cabin 3 days later. The coroner said his throat had been damaged by some kind of illness, possibly related to the same disease that had killed the original congregation. His death was ruled natural causes, brought on by a rare vocal condition that medical science didn't fully understand. I never told anyone the truth about what happened up at Cataract Falls. Who would believe it? I had recordings, but they were all damaged. Nothing but static and noise. The supernatural voices that had sounded so clear to my ears hadn't transferred to tape at all. My voice never fully recovered. I can speak, but I can't sing anymore. The damage is permanent, the doctors say. Something about my vocal cords being stretched beyond their natural limits. They recommend I find a new career, something that doesn't require verbal communication. But I know what really happened. Fighting that supernatural choir didn't just damage my voice, it changed it. Sometimes, late at night when the mountains are quiet, I can hear harmonies in the wind that I know aren't really there. Other times, I catch myself humming melodies I've never heard before in languages that don't exist. The worst part is, I remember how beautiful it was. Even knowing what the ghostly choir really was, even knowing they were trying to kill me, I can't forget how perfect their music sounded. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I just let them take me. Other park rangers have started reporting similar incidents at different sites around the mountains. Always the same pattern: old churches or gathering places where traditional music was performed, always at midnight, always with perfect harmony that draws people in. I've started documenting these reports, but unofficially. I keep detailed records of locations, dates, witnesses. I'm building a map of supernatural activity, trying to understand the pattern. Because I don't think the Cataract Falls congregation was unique. I think they were part of something bigger, something that's been collecting voices and preserving music for longer than we know. The mountains are full of old songs and older spirits, and they're not done hunting yet. Last week, I got a report about singing coming from the ruins of a church near Dollywood. 4-part harmony at midnight, witnesses say. Voices so beautiful they make you cry. I'm heading up there tomorrow with my recording equipment and my grandmother's wooden whistle. Whatever's collecting singers in these mountains, it's going to have a fight on. It's hands. Some songs ain't meant for the living to learn, but sometimes the living have to make sure the dead remember their place. The mountain music tradition is worth preserving, but not at the cost of human lives. Real music comes from real people with real voices, not from supernatural collectors who treat singers like trophies. I can't sing anymore, but I can still fight. And I'll keep fighting until every ghostly choir in these mountains knows that their midnight concerts are over. The dead have had their turn at harmony. Now it's time for silence. My name is Luther Grimwald, and I've been tracking predators in these mountains for 14 years. Used to track different kinds of predators in Vietnam, but that's another story. What I want to tell you about happened in the cranberry wilderness of West Virginia during the worst winter we'd seen in decades. February 1973. Snow so deep you couldn't drive anywhere near my research station. Had to snowshoe 25 miles just to get supplies, and that was if the weather held. I was out there studying wolves, or rather the lack of them. See, the last wolves in these parts were killed off in the 1890s, and without them, the deer population had exploded. The forest was dying from too many hungry mouths and not enough natural balance. That's what I told myself I was doing anyway. Studying the ecological impact of missing predators. PhD work that would look good on paper and maybe help convince the government to reintroduce wolves to the area. Clean, scientific, rational work. I should mention, I'm not the type to believe in ghost stories. Spent too much time in real jungles fighting real enemies to worry about things that go bump in the night. Werewolves were European fairy tales that had no place in American wilderness. When the old-timers in town warned me about staying out of the deep woods during the full moon, I just nodded politely and went about my business. My research station was a simple cabin about 10 miles into the wilderness. Solar panels for power, radio for emergencies, and enough supplies to last through the winter. The work was methodical. Track deer populations, document kill patterns, collect scat samples, measure the damage to vegetation. Real science, the kind you can put numbers on. The deer were everywhere that winter. I'd never seen so many in one area, and they all looked wrong. Too thin, too nervous, constantly looking over their shoulders, like something was hunting them. But there wasn't anything out there big enough to hunt them. Maybe some black bears, but they were hibernating. Maybe some coyotes, but they couldn't take down a healthy adult deer. That should have been my first clue that something wasn't right. It was on a Tuesday morning when I found the first kill. A big buck, maybe 8 points, lying in a clearing about a mile from my cabin. At first glance, it looked like a normal predator kill. Throat torn out, blood in the snow, signs of a struggle. But when I got closer to examine it, something felt off. The bite marks were wrong. I'd studied wolf kills, bear kills, even big cat kills from out west. I knew what predator teeth did to prey. These marks were different. The canine punctures were too big, too wide set. The tear patterns looked almost human. But that was impossible. No human jaw could generate that kind of crushing force. I took photos, made measurements, collected samples, tried to make the evidence fit what I knew about local predators. But the numbers didn't add up. The spacing of the bite marks suggested something with a human skull structure but wolf-sized teeth. The crushing force would require jaw muscles that simply couldn't fit in a human head. I radioed back to headquarters that evening describing what I'd found. My supervisor, Dr. Mills, listened patiently and suggested it might be a large dog that had gone feral. That made sense. Sort of. Maybe someone had lost a big German shepherd or something similar. But even as I filed my report, I knew something was wrong. The tracks around the kill site bothered me. They started as normal boot prints in the snow, size 11, maybe 12, with a distinctive tread pattern I recognized as military issue. I should know. I wore similar boots in the jungle. But about 50 feet from the kill site, the boot prints stopped and wolf tracks began. Not gradually, not like someone had taken off boots and put on snowshoes. The prints just changed, mid-stride. I followed those tracks until dark, and they stayed. Consistent. Four-legged, definitely canine, but larger than any wolf that had ever lived in these mountains. And the gait was wrong, too. Wolves have a specific way of moving through snow, a rhythm developed over thousands of years of evolution. These tracks showed something moving like it was still learning how to walk on four legs. That night, I double-checked the locks on my cabin doors and made sure my rifle was loaded. Told myself I was being paranoid, that there was a rational explanation for everything I'd seen. But my hands shook as I wrote up my notes, and it wasn't from the cold. The second kill happened 3 days later, and this time I was close enough to hear it die. I was checking survey markers about 2 miles north of the cabin when I heard the deer calling. Not the normal alarm snort they make when they detect danger. This was different. This was the sound of an animal in absolute terror, the kind of scream that makes your blood freeze even when you don't know what's making it. The screaming went on for almost 5 minutes before it stopped. I found the deer in a small ravine, and what I saw there still gives me nightmares. The animal had been killed, but not the way any predator I knew would kill. Its legs were broken, not bitten through, but snapped like someone had grabbed them and twisted until the bones gave way. The neck was crushed, but there were also what looked like finger marks in the hide around the throat. Finger marks on a deer killed by something that left wolf tracks. I was taking photos when I heard the sound behind me, a low rumble, almost like a growl, but there was something else mixed in. Something that sounded almost like laughter. I turned around slowly, my camera still in my hands. About 30 feet away, something was watching me from behind a cluster of pine trees. I couldn't see it clearly, just a dark shape that seemed big to be a wolf and the wrong shape to be a man. But I could see its eyes, yellow eyes that caught the afternoon light and held it like mirrors. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then whatever it was made a sound that was definitely laughter, turned around, and disappeared into the forest. I stood there for another few minutes, listening to my heart pound and trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. But the tracks were there in the snow, leading away from where the shape had been standing. And they weren't wolf tracks, they were human feet. Bare human feet in snow that was 20 degrees below freezing. I followed those tracks for about 100 yards before they changed back to wolf prints. Same place where they'd changed before. No transition, no explanation. Just human feet one step, wolf paws the next. That night I radioed Dr. Mills and asked him to come up to the research station. Told him I'd found some unusual predation patterns that needed a second opinion. Couldn't bring myself to tell him about the eyes or the laughter or the footprints that changed species mid-stride. He would have pulled me off the project and sent me for psychological evaluation. Mills arrived 2 days later, skiing in from the road with his usual enthusiasm for fieldwork. He was a good man, maybe 60 years old, been studying wildlife longer than I'd been alive. If anyone could make sense of what I was seeing, it would be him. I showed him the kill sites, the tracks, the bite patterns. He examined everything with his usual scientific thoroughness, taking his own photos and measurements. Interesting, he said, crouched over the second deer carcass. These bite marks are certainly unusual. The jaw structure implied here would be, well, it would be quite extraordinary. Extraordinary how? The spacing suggests something with human dental arrangement but massively oversized canines. And the crushing force, he shook his head. I've never seen anything like it. Even the largest wolves don't have this kind of jaw strength. We spent the rest of the day documenting everything we'd found. Mills was clearly puzzled, but he approached the mystery with scientific curiosity rather than the growing dread I felt. He talked about genetic mutations, possible hybrid species, even suggested we might be looking at evidence of a surviving population of dire wolves, somehow living in these mountains undetected for thousands of years. That night, as we sat in the cabin reviewing our notes, I finally told him about the eyes, about the laughter, about the tracks that changed from human to wolf. Mills listened without interrupting, his face growing more concerned with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Luther," he said finally, "how long have you been alone up here?" 6 weeks. Why? Isolation can play tricks on the mind, especially in harsh conditions like these. What you're describing, it sounds like you might be experiencing some psychological stress. I wanted to argue with him, but part of me wondered if he was right. Maybe I had been alone too long. Maybe my mind was making connections that weren't there, seeing patterns that didn't exist. It would certainly be easier to believe than the alternative. We agreed to spend the next few days doing a systematic survey of the area, documenting everything we found with scientific rigor. If there was really something unusual out there, we'd find concrete evidence. If not, then at least we'd have ruled out any extraordinary explanations. That was our plan anyway. We never got the chance to carry it out. Mills disappeared on the second night he was there. I woke up around midnight to the sound of the cabin door closing. Figured he'd gone outside to use the outhouse, so I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. But something felt wrong. The night was too quiet. Even in winter, there should have been some sound. Wind in the trees, settling snow, something. But there was nothing. Just silence, so complete it felt like being buried alive. I got up and looked out the window. Mills wasn't at the outhouse. I could see his tracks in the snow, leading away from the cabin toward the tree line. They looked wrong somehow, too widely spaced, like he'd been running. But there were no other tracks nearby, nothing that would have made him run. I got dressed and followed the trail. Mills' tracks went about 200 yards into the forest before they just stopped. Not like he'd turned around or climbed a tree. They just ended in the middle of a small clearing, as if he'd vanished into thin air. But there were other tracks in that clearing. Wolf tracks, circling the spot where Mills' footprints ended, and something else, dark stains in the snow that looked black in my flashlight beam, but were probably red. I called his name, shouted until my voice echoed off the mountains. No answer, just that unnatural silence, like the whole forest was holding its breath. I searched for 3 hours before the cold forced me back to the cabin. Radioed for help, but the winter storm that had been building all day was interfering with transmission. All I got was static and broken voices that might have been other ranger stations or might have been my imagination. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. Sat by the window with my rifle, watching the tree line and jumping at every shadow. Told myself Mills had gotten lost, maybe fallen and hit his head, maybe found shelter somewhere and would come walking back in the morning with an embarrassed grin and a story about following some animal tracks too far. But I knew better. Those bloodstains in the snow weren't from a fall. The next morning, I found more evidence of what had happened to Mills. About half a mile from where his tracks ended, I discovered pieces of his clothing hanging from tree branches, his jacket shredded like it had been torn off by claws, his wool hat with holes that looked like bite marks, and finally, his notebook, dropped in the snow and partially covered by fresh snowfall. The last entry was dated the night he disappeared. Subject appears to be stalking us. Observed eyes, reflecting light from approximately 50 yards during evening meal preparation. L believes we are dealing with unknown predator species. Beginning to think he may be correct. Plan to set up observation post tonight and attempt to photograph. The entry ended mid-sentence, as if he'd been interrupted while writing. I was studying the notebook when I heard the sound. A long, low howl echoing from somewhere deeper in the forest. But it wasn't quite a wolf howl. There was something else in it, something that sounded almost like a human voice, and it was answered by another howl, then another, until the whole forest rang with voices that were neither fully animal nor fully human. They were calling to each other, communicating, and I had the horrible feeling they were talking about me. I spent that day fortifying the cabin as best I could. Boarded up windows, reinforced the door, moved all my supplies away from the walls. The radio was still giving me nothing but static, but I kept trying to reach headquarters. Had to let someone know what was happening up here, even if they wouldn't believe it. As darkness fell, I saw them for the first time. They came out of the forest like shadows given substance. At first glance, they looked like wolves, 4 legs, fur, the general shape and size of large predators. But they moved wrong, too upright, too purposeful, and when they got closer to the cabin, I could see their faces. The bone structure was wrong. The skulls were too large, the snouts too short, and the eyes, those yellow eyes I'd seen before, were set forward like a human's rather than to the sides like a wolf's. Predator eyes, designed for depth perception and hunting. But the most disturbing thing was how they worked together. Real wolves hunt as a pack, but this was different. This was coordinated in a way that showed intelligence beyond animal instinct. They spread out around the cabin in a perfect circle, each one taking a position that blocked any possible escape route. Then they sat down and waited, like they had all the time in the world. I counted 7 of them, 7 creatures that weren't quite wolves and weren't quite anything else I could name. They just sat there in the snow, watching the cabin, occasionally making that sound that was half howl and half human voice. Then one of them stood up and walked toward the cabin on its hind legs. It moved like a man, upright and confident, but its proportions were all wrong. Too tall, arms too long, fingers that ended in claws. When it reached the cabin wall, it knocked on the door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. "Luther," it said, and its voice was perfectly human. "Luther, we need to talk." I knew that voice. It belonged to Dr. Mills. I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was full of sand, and my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the rifle. The thing that sounded like Mills knocked again. "Luther, I know you're in there. I know you're scared. But I need you to understand. This isn't what you think it is." "Mills?" My voice came out as barely a whisper. "Yes, it's me. Or part of me. It's complicated." There was a pause, and I heard what sounded like a low growl. "Luther, I need you to open the door. We don't have much time." "What happened to you?" "I'm changing. We're all changing. This place, it does things to you. The forest needs its guardians, Luther. It's been too long without them." I looked through the gap in the boarded windows. The creature at my door had Mill's general height and build, but that's where the similarity ended. Its limbs were elongated, its spine curved in a way that suggested it was more comfortable on 4 legs than 2, and its face, God help me, it still had Mill's eyes, but everything else was wrong. The nose had flattened and spread, the mouth had widened to accommodate teeth that were definitely not human, and coarse hair covered most of the exposed skin. "The wolves," I said, "the ones that were killed in the 1890s. They didn't all die." "No," Mills said. And now his voice had a strange dual quality, as if 2 voices were speaking at once. "Some of them learned to adapt, learned to take new forms when they needed to, but they never forgot what this forest was supposed to be. And now they're making more. The deer are destroying everything, Luther. You've seen it yourself. Without predators to control them, they're eating the forest to death. Something has to restore the balance." I could see the other creatures moving closer to the cabin. They no longer looked like wolves pretending to be something else. They looked like the thing Mills had become, stretched between human and animal, belonging fully to neither world. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you understand. You've spent your life studying predators. You know what this ecosystem needs. Mill's voice was becoming more distorted, the human words mixing with growls and sounds no human throat could make. And because you're already changing. That's when I felt it. The burning in my muscles, the strange clarity of my senses. I could smell things I'd never smelled before. The fierce scent of animals miles away, the complex chemical signatures of the forest itself. My vision had become sharper, able to pick out details in the darkness that should have been invisible. "The bite," I said, remembering the night I'd found the first kill. When I was examining the deer, something bit me. "Just a scratch," Mills said, "but it was enough. The change is already starting, Luther. You can fight it, but you'll only make it more painful." I looked at my hands. The nails had grown longer, and there was hair growing on the backs of my fingers. How had I not noticed it before? "Join us willingly," Mills continued. "Help us restore this place to what it's supposed to be, or fight it and become something twisted and mad." Outside, the other creatures began to circle the cabin. I could hear their claws scratching against the walls, testing for weak points. They were getting impatient. I thought about my rifle, about the silver survey markers I used for mapping the research area. Silver was supposed to hurt werewolves, wasn't it? But these things weren't the werewolves of European fairy tales. They were something else, something that belonged to this place in ways I was only beginning to understand. "What about the people in town?" I asked. "What about the tourists who come here in summer?" Mills was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was more animal than human. "The forest will choose who belongs." That's when I knew I couldn't let this happen. Whatever these things were, whatever they were trying to do, it would mean death for anyone who wandered into their territory, and their territory was expanding. I grabbed my rifle and a handful of the silver markers from my surveying kit. If I was going to die, I'd at least try to take some of them with me. The first shot took Mills in the chest. The silver marker, loaded into my rifle like a makeshift bullet, hit him dead center. He screamed, not a human scream or an animal scream, but something that was both and neither. The sound made my teeth ache and sent the other creatures into a frenzy. They came at the cabin from all sides. I managed to get off 3 more shots before they broke through the door. The silver hurt them. I could see burns spreading from the impact wounds, but it didn't stop them. The fight was short and brutal. I used my rifle as a club when I ran out of ammunition, then grabbed a knife from the kitchen. But there were too many of them, and they were too strong. When one of them grabbed my arm, I felt bones crack under the pressure. But something strange happened as the fight went on. The burning in my muscles became stronger, and I found myself moving faster than I'd ever moved before. My senses were so sharp I could predict their attacks before they made them, and my own strength was increasing. I was changing too. The realization hit me just as one of the creatures lunged for my throat. I caught it mid-leap and threw it across the cabin with strength that should have been impossible. My fingernails had become claws, and when I used them to fight back, they cut through fur and flesh like razors. The pack hesitated. They could sense what was happening to me, and it confused them. I wasn't fully human anymore, but I wasn't one of them either. I was something caught in between. That hesitation gave me the chance I needed. I grabbed the rest of my silver markers and threw them like weapons, driving the pack back. They retreated to the edge of the forest, but they didn't leave. They just sat in the snow and watched, waiting to see what I would become. I never did finish my transformation that night. The silver in my system, from handling the markers, from using them as weapons, seemed to slow the process. I was left suspended between human and something else, aware of both worlds, but fully belonging to neither. By morning, the pack was gone. So was Mill's body. All that remained was blood in the snow and claw marks on the cabin walls that looked like some kind of primitive writing. I radioed for evacuation as soon as the storm passed. Told headquarters there had been a rabies outbreak among the local wildlife, that Dr. Mills had been attacked and killed by infected animals. It was close enough to the truth that no one questioned it too closely. The area was quarantined within a week. Official reason was disease control, but I think some people in the government knew more than they were saying. Rangers who'd worked these mountains for decades had stories they didn't usually tell, stories about things that weren't quite animals and weren't quite human. I left the Forest Service after that. Couldn't risk another transformation. Couldn't trust myself around other people when the moon was full. Found work in a city, surrounded by concrete and steel and artificial light, places where the old wildness couldn't reach me. But it's still there, inside me. Every month, when the moon rises full and bright, I feel the burning start again. I lock myself in my apartment, close the curtains, and wait for it to pass. Most of the time, I stay human. But there have been nights when I've woken up naked in my living room with blood under my fingernails and no memory of how it got there. I keep track of missing persons reports from my old stomping grounds. Every few months, someone disappears in the cranberry wilderness. Hikers who went off the marked trails, hunters who got separated from their groups, researchers who thought they could handle the isolation. The official reports always blame exposure, animal attacks, getting lost in the woods. But I know better. The pack is still out there, still growing. Every person who disappears is another chance for the forest to reclaim what it thinks belongs to it. And maybe it's right. Maybe we did upset the balance so badly that something had to step in and fix it. But that doesn't make it easier to live with. Sometimes I think about going back, not to the cabin, that was destroyed in a controlled burn the year after I left, but to the wilderness itself, to find what's left of Mills and the others who came before him. Part of me believes I could help them, maybe find a way to reverse what happened. The smarter part of me knows I'd just become another member of their pack. So I stay in the city, take my medication, and try to forget about yellow eyes watching from dark forests. But late at night, when the wind is right and the moon is bright, I can still hear them calling. Voices that are neither human nor animal, singing songs that speak of hunger and territory and the wild spaces that remember what they used to be. Some territories choose their guardians, whether they want it or not. And once you've been chosen, there's no going back to what you were before. The forest is patient. It can wait. And someday I might stop fighting and answer its call. My name is Tobias Shadowhawk, and I've been a forest ranger for 19 years. In all that time, fighting poachers and tracking down folks who think they can take what they want from these mountains, I never saw anything like what happened in September of 1981. The Cherokee National Forest was my beat, specifically the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest, 30,800 acres of old-growth trees that have been standing since before Columbus ever thought about sailing west. Some of those tulip poplars are over 400 years old, thick as small houses, reaching up toward heaven like they're trying to touch God himself. I'm half Cherokee on my mother's side, though I never put much stock in the old stories. My grandmother used to tell me about spirits in the forest, about things that could wear the faces of the dead. But those were Navajo tales mostly, skinwalker stories from out west. Cherokee folklore was different. We had our own monsters. The morning it all started, I was checking hunting permits near the old growth section. September meant deer season was coming, and that brought out every yahoo with a rifle from 3 counties over. Most were decent folks, but there's always a few who think rules don't apply to them. That's when I heard the screaming, high-pitched like a woman in terrible pain, echoing through the massive trees. But there was something wrong with it, something that made the hair on my arms stand up. In 19 years, you learn to tell the difference between someone who's hurt and someone who's dying. This was worse than dying. This was someone begging to die. I radioed my location and ran toward the sound, my boots pounding on the forest floor covered with centuries of fallen leaves. The screaming stopped just as I reached a clearing dominated by an ancient tulip poplar that had to be 15 feet across. What I found there broke every rule I thought I knew about how the world worked. 3 hunters were arranged in a perfect circle around the base of that giant tree. They were alive. God help me, they were still breathing, but their skin was gone. Not cut away, not torn off, gone. Like someone had peeled them like apples, leaving the muscle and bone underneath glistening in the morning light. But here's the part that still wakes me up at night. Their skins were hanging from the lower branches of that tree like some kind of sick laundry. Perfect. Whole. Not a tear or cut mark anywhere. And they were moving slightly in the breeze, arms and legs swaying like they were trying to wave goodbye. The hunters were conscious. Their eyes followed me as I approached, mouths working like they were trying to speak. But without skin, without lips, the sounds that came out weren't words anymore. I called for backup and medical, but I knew it was too late. Nobody survives losing all their skin. Hell, nobody survives losing much of it. By the time the paramedics arrived, all three had died, not from blood loss like you'd expect, but from shock. The coroner said later he'd never seen anything like it. The skin removal was surgical, precise, but there were no cutting instruments at the scene. No knives, no scalpels, nothing sharp enough to do that kind of work. The skins themselves were another mystery. When we took them down from the tree, they felt warm, fresh, like they'd just been removed. But they'd been hanging there for hours, and the morning air was cold enough to see your breath. Sheriff Mackenzie showed up around noon with his crime scene team. He took one look at those empty skins and called the FBI. By evening, we had federal agents crawling all over my forest, treating it like some kind of serial killer's playground. I wanted to believe that's all it was. A sick person with medical training and a twisted imagination. But that night, alone, in my cabin, I kept thinking about my grandmother's stories, about things that could wear other faces, about spirits that collected human shapes like some people collect stamps. The next morning brought news that made my blood run cold. 2 more hunters were missing from campsites deeper in the forest. Their gear was still there, their food untouched, but they were gone without a trace. That's when I started to understand that whatever was hunting in my forest, it wasn't done collecting. The FBI sent Agent Sarah Coleman, a behavioral specialist who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else than deep in the Tennessee woods. She had that city cop confidence, all sharp suits and sharper questions. But I could tell the crime scene photos bothered her more than she wanted to admit. "Ranger Shadowhawk," she said, spreading the pictures across my desk like a deck of cards. "In your professional opinion, are we dealing with a cult? Some kind of ritual killing?" I looked at the photos again. Same impossible precision, same surgical removal, same empty skins arranged like decorations. "Ma'am, I've arrested over 200 poachers in my career. Seen what people do to animals when they're drunk or angry or just plain mean. This isn't human work. Everything's human work until we prove otherwise." She pulled out a file. The missing hunters, Jerry Blackwood and Tommy Morrison, both experienced outdoorsmen, both armed. You think they just wandered off? Before I could answer, my radio crackled. Deputy Martinez's voice came through, tight with something that might have been fear. "Tobias, you need to get out to Bear Creek Trail, now." We found Martinez standing 50 feet back from another ancient tree. This one a massive hemlock that blocked out so much sunlight the ground beneath it was bare dirt. He was pale and shaking, his hand resting on his gun like he expected trouble. "They're up there," he said, pointing into the branches. Jerry Blackwood and Tommy Morrison were hanging 30 feet up, tied to the trunk with what looked like their own bootlaces. But they weren't doing either. They were moving, turning their heads to track our movement below, and they were calling out to us. "Help me!" Jerry's voice drifted down, clear and desperate. "Please, I can't feel anything below my neck." The problem was Jerry Blackwood didn't have a neck anymore. What was hanging up there was just skin, empty, slack, like a deflated balloon. But somehow it was talking, pleading, begging us to cut it down. Agent Coleman went for her radio to call in a rescue team, but I grabbed her arm. "Look closer," I said. The skins weren't just empty. They were moving wrong, twisting and writhing in ways that had nothing to do with wind. And the voices, they were too clear, too strong. You can't talk without lungs, without a throat, without all the parts that make speech possible. "What are you saying?" Coleman whispered. "I'm saying those aren't Jerry and Tommy anymore. I'm saying something's wearing them." As if responding to my words, both skins stopped moving. The voices cut off mid-plea. Then, slowly, they turned to look directly at us. The eye holes were empty, but I felt the weight of something looking back. "Tommy Morrison," the Jerry skin said in Tommy's voice. "That's my name. I'm Tommy Morrison, and I'm hurt real bad. You gotta help me." Jerry Blackwood, said the Tommy Skin in Jerry's voice. My wife's name is Susan. We got 2 kids. Please don't leave me here. Agent Coleman drew her service weapon, though I couldn't imagine what she planned to shoot. This is impossible. Dead tissue doesn't move, doesn't speak. We're not dead, both Skins said in unison, their voices blending into something that made my teeth ache. We're preserved. We're safe now. We'll always be safe. That's when I saw movement in the forest behind us. More shapes moving between the trees. But these weren't right either. A bear walking on 2 legs. A deer with human hands instead of hoof. An owl with a person's face watching us from a low branch. We need to leave, I said, backing toward our vehicles. Right now. We can't abandon possible survivors, Coleman argued, but her voice was shaking. Those aren't survivors, I said as more shapes emerged from the deeper woods. Those are collections. The thing wearing Jerry's skin laughed and the sound echoed strangely in the forest. Tobias Shadowhawk, half Cherokee. Your grandmother was Mary Climbing Bear. She knew the old ways. I froze. Nobody outside my family knew my grandmother's Cherokee name. She told you stories, the Jerry Skin continued, about things that preserve what's lost, about spirits that keep the old blood alive when everything else fades away. How do you know that? Because I'm wearing someone who remembered, someone who listened to the same stories, someone who wanted to keep the Cherokee ways alive, just like you do. Agent Coleman was backing toward her car now, her radio out and calling for immediate backup. But something told me backup wouldn't matter. Whatever this thing was, it had been collecting skins for a long time, learning, growing, getting ready for something bigger than just a few hunters in the woods. As we reached our vehicles, the Tommy Skin called out one last time. Tell Susan I love her, Tobias. Tell her I'm safe now. Tell her I'll always be safe. But I knew Tommy Morrison was gone. Whatever was speaking with his voice was something else entirely, something that collected people like my grandmother collected stories. And it was just getting started. The FBI brought in a full team within 24 hours, crime scene specialists, forensic anthropologists, even a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment. But they couldn't find the skins we'd seen hanging in that hemlock tree. By the time the full team arrived, they were gone. You're telling me you saw empty human skins talking to you, Agent Coleman said, reviewing my statement for the 3rd time. Skins that somehow vanished overnight. I'm telling you what Deputy Martinez and I both witnessed. Check his statement. She flipped through the file. Deputy Martinez says he saw what looked like camping gear in the trees, possibly tarps or sleeping bags that in the stress of the moment you both misidentified. I stared at her. Martinez had been right next to me. He'd heard those voices, seen those empty faces looking down at us. But when I called him that morning, his story had changed. Now he wasn't sure what he'd seen. Thought maybe it was just shadows and wind. That's when I started to understand how this thing worked. It didn't just collect skins. It collected trust, made people doubt what they'd experienced, made them question their own memories. 3 more hunters went missing that week. The FBI set up a command post at the ranger station and started treating the forest like a crime scene. No camping, no hunting, no hiking. But people kept disappearing anyway. The families started arriving on Thursday. Susan Morrison, Tommy's wife, brought their 2 kids. She kept asking me if I'd found him, if there was any hope. I wanted to tell her the truth, but who would believe it? How do you explain to a mother that her husband's skin is walking around somewhere, worn by something that feeds on Cherokee blood? That night, I was reviewing topographical maps in my cabin when someone knocked on my door. 3 soft taps, then a pause, then 3 more. The same pattern my father used to use when I was a kid. I opened the door, and there he was. James Shadowhawk, looking exactly like he had the day he died 12 years ago. Same flannel shirt, same work boots, same easy smile that used to make everything seem okay. "Hello, son," he said. "Mind if I come in?" My father had been killed by a drunk driver in 1969. I'd buried him myself, watched them lower his coffin into Cherokee soil. But there he stood on my porch, real as daylight, not looking a day older than when I'd seen him. "You're not real," I whispered. "Real enough," he said, stepping inside without invitation. "Real enough to remember teaching you to track when you were 8. Real enough to remember the night you graduated Ranger School, how proud I was." He sat in his old chair, the one I'd kept all these years because I couldn't bear to throw it away. It was like watching a ghost, except ghosts don't leave footprints in the dust on your floor. "I've been watching you work this case," he continued. "You're close to understanding, but you're fighting it. Fighting the truth because it scares you." "What truth?" "That some things are worth preserving, even if the method seems wrong. The Cherokee were driven from these mountains, Tobias. Our culture, our language, our ways, all of it scattered to the wind. But something came back. Something that wants to keep the old blood alive." I backed against the wall, my hand finding the shotgun I kept by the door. "You're not my father. My father would never justify murder." "Murder?" He laughed, and it sounded exactly like my father's laugh. "Nobody's been murdered, son. They've been preserved, kept safe. The hunters, the campers, they're all still alive in a way. Their skins remember. Their blood remembers." "Skins don't remember anything. Skins are just tissue." "Cherokee skins remember. Cherokee blood carries the stories, the traditions, the sacred knowledge. That's what I collect. That's what I preserve." The thing wearing my father's face stood up and walked to the window. Outside, I could see more shapes moving in the darkness. Familiar shapes. My mother, my uncle, my grandmother. All dead. All watching my cabin with empty eyes. "Join us, Tobias. Let me preserve you too. You're the last ranger in this forest with Cherokee blood. When you're gone, who'll remember the old ways? Who'll protect these sacred places?" I raised the shotgun, though my hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold it steady. Get out of my house. "You can't kill what's already dead, son, and you can't shoot your own father." But I could. I pulled the trigger, watching the thing that wore my father's face dissolve like smoke. The skin fell to the floor, empty, deflated, but still warm to the touch. Outside, the other shapes faded back into the forest, but I knew they'd be back. The skin merchant wasn't done with me yet. When Agent Coleman arrived the next morning, responding to reports of gunshots, she found me sitting on my porch with the shotgun across my knees. "What happened here, Ranger?" I looked at the empty skin on my floor, then at her face. Young, determined, skeptical of everything that couldn't be measured or cataloged. She wouldn't believe me. Hell, part of me didn't believe me. "Raccoon got in the house," I said. "Had to run it off." But as she walked back to her car, I saw her face in the window reflection. For just a moment, it wasn't Agent Coleman looking back at me. It was my grandmother, Mary Climbing Bear, smiling like she'd just heard a very good story. By Sunday, the FBI was ready to pack up. They'd found no physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints that led anywhere useful. Agent Coleman filed her report. Suspected serial killer with advanced medical training. Case remains open pending further developments. But I knew they'd be back. Not the FBI. They were done with us. The thing in the forest would be back. It had shown me my father, tested my resolve. Now it would try something else. I spent that night in my grandmother's old cabin, deeper in the forest than the FBI had searched. She'd lived there until she died, keeping the old Cherokee traditions alive, even when the world around her changed. If there was an answer to this nightmare, it would be in her things. I found it in a tobacco pouch wrapped in doeskin, sage, sweetgrass, and something else I didn't recognize. Attached was a note in her careful handwriting. For the skin merchant, when he comes calling, some things must be preserved, but not in the way he chooses. My grandmother had known. Somehow she'd known this day would come. The attack came at midnight. First, the sounds, voices calling, my name from the forest, familiar voices of people I'd loved and lost. Then the shapes appeared at the windows, my father again, but also my mother, who died of cancer when I was 16. My Uncle Robert, killed in Vietnam. All of them pressing against the glass, mouths moving, begging me to let them in. "We're cold, Tobias," my mother said. "We've been cold so long. Let us come home." The door handle turned. I hadn't locked it. You don't lock doors against family, even when you know they're not really family anymore. They filed in like guests arriving for dinner. 7 figures wearing the faces of my loved ones, moving with that strange, fluid grace that skin shows when there's nothing solid underneath to support it. "You ran from us before," said the thing wearing my father's face. "But you can't keep running. This forest is sacred, Tobias. Cherokee blood has walked these paths for 1,000 years. We're just trying to keep it walking for 1,000 more. By stealing skins, by wearing the dead." "The dead don't need their skins," said my mother thing. "But the living need their memories, need their stories, need their blood." That's when I understood. This wasn't random killing. It was targeted, selective. The skin merchant was collecting Cherokee descendants, preserving the bloodline the only way it knew how. In its twisted logic, it was trying to save us. "What are you?" I asked. The 7 shapes moved closer, surrounding me. When they spoke, it was in unison, their voices blending into something that sounded like wind through ancient trees. "We are what's left when everything else is taken away. When the soldiers came and drove our people west. When the children were stolen and forced to forget their names. When the language died on the tongue of the last speaker. We remained. We are the preservation of last resort. Your murder, your abomination. We are bound." "A necessity," they said. "Look around you, Tobias. How many Cherokee speakers are left in these mountains? How many know the old ceremonies? How many remember the sacred places? You are the last ranger with Cherokee blood in these forests. When you die, what happens to the memory of this place?" I pulled out my grandmother's tobacco pouch. The sage felt warm in my hand, like it was alive, like it was waiting. "My grandmother knew about you," I said. "She left me something." The shapes stopped moving. For the first time, they looked uncertain. "Mary Climbing Bear was wise," they admitted. "She understood the old ways. She would have joined us willingly. She would have fought you with everything she had." I lit the sage with a match from my pocket. The smoke rose thick and white, filling the cabin with the smell of sacred ceremony. The things wearing my family's faces began to writhe, their forms becoming less solid. "You cannot banish what serves the people," they said, but their voices were weaker now, strained. "I'm not banishing you," I said, remembering my grandmother's teachings, her stories about balance and respect. "I'm offering you a different way to serve." The smoke swirled around the 7 figures, and for a moment I saw them as they really were, not monsters, but guardians driven mad by loss. Spirits that had watched their people scattered, their culture nearly destroyed, their sacred places forgotten. "Preserve the stories," I said, "not the people. Guard the places, not by killing, but by keeping them sacred. Let the Cherokee who remain choose their own path." The smoke grew thicker, and one by one, the shapes began to fade. My father was the last to go. "Will you remember us, son?" he asked. And for a moment his voice sounded real, sounded like the man who'd raised me. "I'll remember everything," I promised. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the cape. Been with the lingering smell of sage and the echo of wind through trees that had watched over Cherokee land since before memory began. The FBI closed the case 3 weeks later. "Insufficient evidence to proceed," Agent Coleman told me. "Probably a drifter, someone passing through. He'll surface again somewhere else." But I knew better. The skin merchant was gone, not destroyed, but transformed, returned to its original purpose as guardian rather than collector. The forest felt different now, quieter, older, like something ancient had finally found peace. I kept my job as ranger, but everything changed after that night. Hikers reported feeling watched in the deep woods, But it wasn't the threatening presence from before. It was protective, respectful. Things that didn't belong, poachers, vandals, people who came to harm rather than appreciate, found themselves turned around, lost, encouraged to leave by forces they couldn't name. The missing hunters were never found. Sometimes I wonder if they're still out there somewhere, their skins moving through the forest, preserving Cherokee stories in ways I'm not sure I want to understand. But the killing stopped. The collecting stopped. 3 months later, Susan Morrison came to see me one last time before moving back to her family in North Carolina. "I dreamed about Tommy last night," she told me, standing in my office with her 2 kids fidgeting beside her. "He told me he was safe, that he was protecting something important, and I shouldn't worry about him anymore." I didn't know what to say to that. How do you tell a widow that her husband's spirit might actually be at peace, just not in the way she'd ever imagine? "Dreams can be healing," I said finally. "Sometimes they help us let go." She nodded and gathered her children. At the door, she paused. "The Cherokee have a word, don't they, for spirits that protect sacred places?" "Several words," I admitted. "Tommy always respected these mountains. If he's really gone, I can't think of any place he'd rather be." After she left, I walked out to the Joyce Kilmer Memorial Forest. The ancient trees stood unchanged, their massive trunks reaching toward heaven like they had for centuries before I was born and would for centuries after I died. But now I could feel something moving in the shadows between them. Not hunting, not collecting, just watching, remembering, keeping the old stories alive in the way my grandmother would have approved of. Sometimes late at night, when I'm alone in my cabin, I hear voices in the wind. Cherokee words I half remember from childhood, songs my grandmother used to hum while she worked. The language isn't dead here. It lives in the trees, in the stones, in the spaces between heartbeats. And sometimes when teenagers come to the forest looking for trouble, when poachers think they can take what doesn't belong to them, when developers eye the old-growth timber with dollar signs in their eyes, they find themselves face to face with something that makes them remember why certain places are sacred. They leave. They always leave. And the forest remains protected. I'm getting older now, and someday there'll be a new ranger in these mountains. I hope they'll understand that some things are worth preserving, even if the methods seem impossible. I hope they'll listen to the voices in the wind, and remember that the Cherokee may have been driven from this land, but they never really left. Because in the end, that's what the skin merchant taught me. Some spirits find peace not in moving on, but in staying exactly where they belong. And these mountains will always belong to the Cherokee, no matter who holds the deed.